Okay, we're just gonna do this again. Oh my god. Just gonna do this quickly and start with chapter 7 and we could get it from there. And now, chapter 7. Mike stood next to the chair behind the desk and stared at the CCTV monitors. His gaze was locked on the middle one, which provided an exterior view of the building. Mike was in. Apparently, flipping the breaker level has done more than get the interior lights back on. And an exterior. And. Fuck. Oh my god, guys. I'm. Hold on. Chapter 7. Mike stood next to the chair behind the desk and stared at the CCTV monitors. His gaze was locked on the middle one, which provided an exterior view of the building Mike was in. Apparently, flipping the breaker levels has done more than get the interior lights back on, and it also tripped whatever switch controlled the outside lights. Staring at the lights on the monitors now, Mike wasn't sure whenever seeing the exterior lights up would have encouraged him or discouraged him from coming inside. The garage sign up was supposed to be welcoming. He was sure about it, but it had the opposite effect on Mike. Maybe it's because of the lights, although were constantly flickering, alternately casting a harsh glare and uninviting shadows out of the sparing building, resembling a slump sleeping giant in the warning glare and shadows. The building clearly has seen better days, roof sagging, paint peeling, gutter dangling. The building's windows were boarded over. Even so, the CCTV monitors revealed a lit up, faded. Okay, turn the page. Red sign that read Freddy Fazbear's Pizzeria. In the blossom of a sputtering spotlight, a cutout of the famed dude himself, the big brown bear. Mike has seen on the hallway poster, looks out over the empty parking lot. The bear's full toothed grin was probably supposed to shout, "Coming in." Again, it had the opposite effect on Mike. Sighing, Mike looks at the VCR. Raglan has told Mike to look for a tape in the desktop drawer. Mike reaches out and pulls that drawer open. Sure enough, a VCR tape sat next to a few pens. Mike grabs the tape before he sits down in the desk, rolling some gray vinyl off his chair. Then he shoves the tape into the old VCR. He hits the power button on the TV. A click, a whirl, a thunk, and a few waving tracking lines crackle onto the TV screen. Staticky old-timey cartoon music plays, and the tracking line gives way to a graphic version of the Freddy Fazbear Pizza logo. Mike raises an eyebrow at the tinny music, but he leans in the back in the chair and puts his attention on the TV screen as the logo dissolves into a title, Freddy Fazbear's Pizzeria Security Brief. The cartoon music fades into a loud 80 rock music. Mike Rogers' The Tape title breaks into a gazillion pixels as the title was replaced by a large restaurant dining room filled with happy families eating, talking, and laughing. A dozen or so little kids played or danced in the aisles between the tables. Your merry faced woman with curly strawberry blonde hair beamed at the cameras. Her jolliness would have put Santa to shame. Mike found himself leaning back farther, as if he could escape the woman's merriness. The woman had pretty blue eyes and pouty red painted lips that she stretched into a big smile as she sang out, "Welcome to Freddy Fazbear's Pizza, a magical place for kids and grown-ups alike, a place where fantasy and fun come to life." The woman flung out her arms, and for a second Mike thought she was going to twirl with glee, but she didn't. Instead, she said, "If you're watching this video, it means you've been selected as Freddy's newest security guard. Congratulations, we're gonna have so much fun together." Mike raises an eyebrow. "We are?" he asked the TV screen. He shakes his head as he keeps watching. On the TV, the dining room scene up and the woman flips flops away, and then the woman reappears in the front of a packed, brightly lit arcade. The arcade, lined with full-size games, pinball machines, skee-ball machines, as well as a bunch of games Mike didn't recognize, features a huge network of plastic towers and tunnels. These crisscross over a giant plastic ball pit, even without all the blissed out little kids playing. It was clear that the place was any child's dream playground. The woman began speaking again. The genius who created Fazbear Entertainment opened Freddy Fazbear's Pizzeria to indulge in his two greatest passions, family-friendly fun and cutting-edge animatronic technology. On the screen, the arcade swirls into a black hole, and another room bursts into view. Mike didn't think this room looked like nearly as much fun. Stuffed full of metal shelves and work tables. The room on the screen now was like with robotic parts and all that. In the center of the room, a reclining metal chair was occupied by an unmoving animatronic. It was tough to tell what the animatronic was meant to be. Mike could only see a bond of fur at the edges of the expanse of metal in the skeleton and a tangled up of wires. A white coated man, my guess was a technician, was probing at the wires with some tools that looked like a cross between a pair of pliers and a pair of sniping shears. The tool was almost evil looking, sharp and hard. The woman reappeared on the screen, still looking relentless happy. She's thrilled, it seems. State of the art robotics engineering enables our characters to interact with guests in truly lifelike fashions, while clearly concealed rechargeable cells give the characters limited range to roam free. The woman rose up her tiptoes. Safety first. The screen suddenly went dark, and then the woman reappears. Now she's in the foot of an expanse of the red stage curtains. This should be good, Mike mutters. The woman on the screen says in a hype tone, "Let's introduce you to the stars of the show. Hit it, guys." The woman makes a sweeping gesture with her left arm. The woman on the screen disappears, and the TV was filled with the image of a hand striking a palm sized red plastic button. The label above the button reads, "Showtime." The curtains once again fill the TV screen. The woman was no longer in front of them, and the curtains were starting to part. An inch, two, three, four, the hems of the curtain flutter as they move, and then the image on the screen froze, and then dissolved into a blur of tracking lines. Mike leans forward and whacks the side of the small TV. He didn't think it would do any good, but the TV emits the sound of distorted laughter, and the woman suddenly reappears on the screen. She now stood in front of the plated, pulled back curtain. She was looking to her right, apparently towards wherever she was now on the exposed stage. "Adorable, aren't they?" the woman asked, using a cutesy voice. "These cuddly critters and their property technology that brings them to life are now your sacred duty to protect. Keep them safe and help ensure that Freddy Fazbear's Pizza is here to delight, dazzle, and entertain for years to come." The screen went black. Mike stared at it. "Seriously?" he asked out loud. The desk chair lets out a squeal as Mike leans forward and pulls the tape from the VCR. He sucked it back in the desk jar and then shifts his attention to the CCTV monitors. There was 9 of them. Each one of them were streaming footage of various rooms in the restaurant, or some angle of the restaurant, of its exteriors or its surroundings. All of the images were black and white, and they were blurry and low resolution. The obscure monochromatic scenes reminded Mike of setting shots in old horror movies. Even though the area appeared to be empty, they clearly hinted at a trouble lurking off screen. They were supremely creepy. Mike lifts his gaze and looks around the room again. His attention lands on the lone locker. Randomly, his mind was suddenly filled with the image of seeing one of the boys in his school, Bobby, a poor skinny kid who was teased relentlessly, being stuffed into his locker. The little hairs on the back of Mike's arm bristle as he looks at the slats at the top of the locker. What exactly was in the thing? Mike tries to dismiss the question, but he knew he wouldn't be able to settle until he satisfied himself that the locker was empty, or that was it was at least filled with something inanimate. Leaving his backpack on the desk next to the TV, Mike got up and walked over to the locker. Hesitating only for a second, he reached out and yanked on the locker's unsecured lock. The locker door swung open and slapped back against the wall. With a clink, as Mike looked into the locker, his gaze met the bug-eyed of a rosy-cheeked, grinning little boy. Mike yelped and immediately slammed the locker door shut again. He backed away from the locker and stared at it. His heart felt like it was detonating from his chest. "The hell's that?" Mike's brain provided him with a reply. What if he sees that scene? He's seen a boy. a shiny skin, too colorful face, too much white in the eyes, and most importantly, the boy was very, very puny. Conclusion, it wasn't a real boy. Mike rolls his eyes at his own skiddiness. He breathes in and out evenly, and then he steps forward. This time, Mike pulls the locker door open slowly. Sitting on a locker top shelf, the boy gazed at Mike placidly. Not a boy, a doll. The doll wore a pinstripe propeller top cap and held a sanity red balloon. The doll was too short to have been mistaken for a real child. Unless you got yourself ready to jump at your own shadow state of high anxiety. I really need to calm down, Mike says. The boy nodded and agreed, but he didn't disagree either. The boy's grin, however, didn't make Mike feel like the doll was laughing at him. Mike looked at the doll's bulging eyes. Little worms of unease crawled up Mike's neck. He quickly reached and turned the doll's head so its face was aimed towards the back of the locker. There, balloon boy, Mike said. Laugh at that. Mike drops his gaze from the doll and inspected the rest of the locker, wanting to be sure it didn't hold any more creepily toys. Thankfully, it didn't. There was only two things in the locker. One was great, a flashlight, and one of the big things in the back that he can use as a weapon, if necessary. Mike really hoped it won't be necessary. The second thing in the locker was a Freddy Fazbear branded security vest. Mike studies the vest for a second and shrugs. Why not? Mike tugs the vest from the wire hanger. Mike grabs the flashlight, gives Balloon Boy one last glance. To be honest, he wanted to make sure he was still turned toward the back of the locker and shuts the locker door. Stepping over to the desk, he sets the flashlight where he was able to grab it quickly if the power went out again. Then he slips on the vest and might as well look the part, armed now with the hefty flashlight and determination to not be so on the edge. Mike decides that he's more comfortable if he explores his surroundings a bit. Hello. The office itself did not feel like a much safe haven, and so Mike wanted to know what else the building held. He decided to start with the main dining room he's seen in the video. Mike left the office and headed back down the main hall, bypassing all the closed doors. Not because he was afraid of what was behind them. Nope, not afraid at all. Mike retraced his steps back to the lobby. As he went, he shoved his flashlight everywhere he went. He didn't see much that he hasn't noticed before, except he did see the hallway ceiling that had the intercom speakers, like the one in his office. He figured they were probably all over the restaurant. When Mike reached the lobby, he turned toward the archway. Then he strode through it and looked around. Although the building's power was full on, the cavernous dimming area, it had to be at least 100 feet square, was still filled with puzzles of black and gray and the palace of dirty yellow. Mike looked up, and he saw that the yellow came from the moonlight shining towards a bank of dirty skylights. Mike looked around and he saw a light switch to the left of the archway. He takes a step towards it, but then he remembers Raglan's warnings about the electrical system. He didn't want to risk plunging the entire building into pitch darkness again, so he flicks on his flashlight. As soon as Mike aims his flashlight at the expanse in the front of him, he kind of wishes he hasn't turned it on. The scene was bleak. Maybe if Mike hasn't watched the video, he wouldn't have been put off by the vacant, filthy, dislayed room. Mike's mind, however, was still filled with the bright, happy scenes from the video. He expected to find a colorful room filled with tables. Instead, he was looking at the wasteland. Only a few tables remained, and those were covered with dust or filthy torn tablecloths. A few toppled stacks of chairs were scattered around the room. The black and white floors were littered with debris, party hats, paper plates, napkins, and empty cups. Taking one of the cups, Mike walks towards the two stages on the opposite side of the room. One of the stages were covered with an older version of the red curtains he has seen in the video. The velvet on the curtains now were mated, and the red were faded over a smaller stage to the left. A purple curtain with golden starred saggets. Mike recognized it from the poster in the hallway. He sincerely hoped the fox from the poster wasn't lurking behind the curtain. To contain the sudden monotony the neglect and forgotten dining room has created, Mike whistles loudly. The sound rang through the room, strolling out away from him, and then returning. It reminded him of his way of his words as echoed back to him in the lobby. Weird. Mike shook his head, reminding himself that he decided not to be spooked. He whistles again, even louder. He starts to take a step forward. A loud clatter jerked Mike into a full startle. He sucked in a gasp and snapped his flashlight beam toward the sound. His flashlight rays were aimed at the curtains that covered the stage. What was back there? Was it something else here? Hello? Mike called out. As soon as he threw out the word, he regretted it. How many times has he laughed at the character in a movie when they call out hello if someone was there? It was probably someone up to any good. And now Mike has announced his presence and his exact location. Brilliant. Mike kept his flashlight aimed at the curtains. They didn't move. Staying very still, Mike listened. He heard nothing, not even his own breathing. Mike realized he stopped breathing, and he started again. Shining his light in full circle, Mike decided there was way too much potential for hiding spaces in the room, not at least which was behind the closed curtains. The flashlight and the wimpy moonlight didn't give him even the closest chance to an exceptional view of the area around him. Mike turns in to stroll to the light switch. Using it was worth the risk. Mike reaches the switch quickly. He flips it upwards. Nothing happens. Mike flips the switch up and down several times. Click, click, click. No light. Perfect. The word toys with him, the same way his whistle has. Mike decides to keep his mouth closed from now on. For a second, Mike thought about retreating back to the office. But if someone wasn't there, perfect, Mike says, right? For a second, Mike thought, "What is it worth it? What if someone wasn't in there? What if he calms down? I'm not getting paid for this enough," Mike thought. Even so, he steps away from the light switch, taking a deep breath. He advanced farther into the room. Feeling vulnerable out in the middle of the room, Mike decides to hug the right wall. Though that wall, he noticed, was covered with children drawings, maybe 100 or more stick figures drawings, not unlike many of Abby's masterpieces, plastering the dining room wall like wallpapers. Yellow and curling, the drawings fluttered as Mike passed them. Although Mike's flashlight beam illuminated the drawings, he gave them over only the little of the attention. His focus was on the main stage, and that's where the sound was coming from. Past the drawings, Mike skipped over the short flight of stairs that led up to the stage. Near the steps, and a hand-sized red button was on the walls. It was the button for the video. The Showtime letter above might not have been able to piece the word together. Mike aimed his flashlight at the button. He shook his head. No way in hell was he going to press that thing. Mike passes by the button. He climbs up to the area and steps on the stage. Mike for sure was going to walk in far enough in front of the curtains that he was beyond arm reach of anything that might want to come out from behind him. Mike slowly steps into the dusty wood stage floor until he reaches the middle of the stage where the two sides of the curtains met. He shrinks his light into the half-inch gap behind him, straightening his position. He gets his shoulders back like a soldier-like stance would prepare him for he was about to face. Mike reaches out and takes the edge of the curtain in his left hand. The velvet was crusty behind his fingertips, very, very crusty. Mike pulls the curtain farther back, and once again he sees something horrifying. When Mike's flashlight beams lands on the first grinning thing, he sees a big toothed mouth. The beam immediately jerks away, that flicks the light to another massive grin and another. Stunned and awed by the size of the tooth-filled mouths he was seeing, Mike sees his light and aims it to the illuminated as widest view as possible. As soon as he took in the whole scene, he's all morphed into dread. Mike immediately steps back, still clutching the curtains in his left hand, not because he wanted to, but because his fingers had specifically clamped onto velvet material. He retreated. The curtains came with him. Pulling up and away from the stage floor and opening a wider gap, Mike swept his flashlight left and right, and then he quickly shot the light away from what he was seeing. Finally dropping the curtain, Mike turned. He didn't bother to head for the stair stage. He just leaped off the stage and started hot footing it through the dining area. As Mike ran, his brain provided him with the recap of what he's seen. The huge white eyes that hovered around the leering grin that has sent him scampering away like a bunny rabbit pursuing a hawk. The eyes. Bunny rabbit. Has Mike really seen what he thought he's seen? A chilled cascade through Mike's body like a freezing waterfall. He ran faster. Mike tried to tell himself that his brain was playing tricks on him, but he hasn't seen what he thought he's seen. But he knew he was lying to himself. Just as Mike has dropped the curtain, one set of white eyes, the set that belonged to the big blue bunny, has shifted. It has seen Mike retreat. Okay, we're in chapter 8. I'm just gonna take a water break. Hold on. I'm gonna just drink a glass of water. Just gonna drink a water. Anyway, I'm back. Okay, you gotta not hydrate. Water. Yummy. Yummers. We made it to chapter 8. We're gonna stop at last time we stopped at chapter 7. Um chapter 7. We'll stop at chapter 14. Sticking to his trusty nighttime routine was more than a little challenging for Mike. Given the circumstances, a multitude of obstacles stood between Mike and the normal flow of his bedtime routine. First, of course, there was the fact that he was at work. He couldn't have been hired to sleep, but to be heck with that, who's gonna know if he slept instead of watching the creepy monitors? Second, there was the content of the building Mike was in. As much as he tried to convince himself that he hadn't slept in, the blurred purple bunny moved his eyes to watch him. He knew he had to. If the bunny could watch them, what else could he do? What else could the animatronics do? Mike had assumed they were powered down, but were they? Third, Mike wasn't tired. He was too freaked out to be tired. But then, what are the pills for? Mike pondered these and other issues for an hour or so. He returned to the office. He also watched the office doors, which were locked, when nothing had come to get him during the hours. But Mike decided to stick to his well established bedtime habits. But first, he's dragged into one of the filling cabinets, the battered one, over to the door, looking again at the scratches on the floor. He wondered if he wasn't the first one to use the cabinet as a barricade. If so, what did the scratches mean? He didn't let himself think about it. Returning to the desk, Mike looked at the chair. Not ideal for sleeping, but he did put the head on the desk. It could make it work. Mike opens his backpack and starts pulling out what he needs. Pills, check. Bottle, water, check. Cassette player, check. Dream Theory, check. Alarm clock? Mike looks down at his watch. He decides to use his watch as an alarm clock. Instead of bringing his alarm clock from home, he sets his watch alarm now. Mike lays the paperback book next to the cassette tape, and then he takes his pill. Looking at the door one last time, Mike shifts his gaze to the wall clock opposite desk. The hour hand was halfway between midnight and 1 a.m. Mike looks at the monitor in turn. Parking lot, lobby, hallway, kitchen, arcade, dining room, storage room, back of the restaurant, front of the restaurant, all empty, all quiet. Mike puts his head down on his folded arms. He closes his eyes beside his bed, of course. There was one piece in Mike's nightly arsenal that he hasn't brought with him, the poster. But even so, when he closed his eyes, he immediately saw the swaying pine trees, and he heard the breeze, too, drifting into unconsciousness. Mike twitches and frowns. Was that the breeze he was hearing? It didn't sound quite right. Okay. It didn't sound quite right. It sounded more like static than a breeze, as he was hearing the scratchy modulations of feedback coming to the speaker. Maybe an intercom. This thought about derail Mike descends into dreamland, but the pull of the pine trees' undulations was too strong. Mike ignored the crackling that mirrored the sunny sound of the breeze. He let the pine trees drop him into the scene that was so familiar to him. The scene, however, didn't flow smoothly in Mike's mind tonight. It came in snatches. Carrying trees, branches, orange toy airplane flying through the air, a spray of ketchup. How about some burgers in that ketchup, hun? Mike dad asked. Thump. Fizz. Mike's mom voice calls out. Keep an eye on your brother. Frisbee whizzing. Car engine revving. 12-year-old Mike shouts, Garrett! The branch slaps on Mike's face. The black car zooms away. The Garrett's pale face in the car back window. Mike opens his mouth to scream, and for once the scream makes it out of his mouth. Mike watches the black car disappear around and then Mike hears children laughing. The sound comes from behind him. Confused, Mike turns. 5 children stand in the middle of the now empty road. One of them wears a paper top hat. One has a paper bib tied around the neck. One wears paper ears on her head. And one holds a paper hook. The fifth child, a blond boy with icy blue eyes, stands out in the front of the other children. He has no paper props. Mike stares at the blond boy. Who are you? He asks. How did you get here? The boy says nothing. In the purity of Mike's vision, he sees the other children playing for a moment. They seem strangely abstract, oversimplified. They almost two-dimensional, like paper dolls instead of real children. As soon as Mike turns and looks at the children for full on, though the children are perfectly real, Mike shifts his gaze back to the blond boy. As the focus transitions, he gets the same cardboard cutout expression of the kids, quickly reorienting to look at the kids straight on. The flattened effect disappears again. Mike frowns, baffled, as bewildered as he feels, however, Mike has little fire of exhilaration flickering in his belly. Whatever happening is new, different than anything he's seen before. Mike steps toward the blond boy as he gestures back over his shoulder to where the car disappeared. Did you see that car? Mike asks. Did you see what happened? The blond boy studies Mike as if Mike was an ant invading a picnic. Mike tries again. Did you see what took my brother? The blond boy smiles beyond him. The other children in the back are 2D, like they stepped off the page of a book. Mike looks directly at the children. They're real again. Once, twice, 3 times, Mike adjusts his gaze, focusing, unfocusing, focusing, unfocusing, focusing, unfocusing. The children turn the blade images and then swells back into 3D. Finally, the children abruptly scatter. All 5 of the kids run. They go in 5 different directions. Mike calls out, Wait! He looks from one fleeing child to the next, trying to decide which one to follow. Mike finally chooses the blond boy, who is just trying to disappear into the woods. Mike takes off in a full sprint. Pine branches stacks on Mike's face as he strains to keep the boy in his sight. He can see flashes of blond hair through the branches. If he can just stay with the boy until they're out of the trees. Thunk! Mike's foot hits a rock. He loses his balance and pitches forward, His body hits the ground. Mike opens his eyes and discovers he was pigeon forward out of his chair. His body flew toward the chair. His head cracked against the hard linoleum. Moaning, Mike puts his head and hand to his forehead. He winces when his fingers press against a lump near his temple. Oh! Mike pulls his hand back from the tender area. He pushes it off the floor and manages to get on his knees. Just as he's starting to get his bearing, a shrieking beep starts stabbing at the pain of his head. Mike scrambles to get his feet and clumsily poke at his watch. Managing to shut off the alarm, he looks at the digital numbers. It was 6 a.m. Dropping back into the office chair, Mike slowly leans forward and hits the rewind on his cassette. He picks up his paperback book and flutters his page absently. What had happened to his dream? Who were those kids? Mike rubs the sleep from his eyes, his flinch when he had encountered the bump on his forehead. Mike drops his hand and looks around the office. It was as he left it before he'd gone to sleep, but something about it. Mike has never had a dream like that before. It couldn't be a coincidence that it happened when he was in this room. He thought about the dream, the kids, the top hat, the bib, the bunny ears, the hook. Had he just weirded himself out that the fears had penetrated into his dream? Or was more going on? Mike's stomach was concentrated with fear and confusion, but it was also fluttered. It was fluttered with excitement. It was on the verge of a breakthrough. The rising sun beams follows Mike through the door as he steps into his house. The beams stretch out of ahead of Mike and lands on Max, who was prone on her stomach on the sofa. The TV was particularly on QVC. Mike, his body feeling like it was buzzing droppings and backpack on a white bakery bag on the kitchen table. He'd been so spun up on what happened on his dream that he's been splurged and gotten donuts from the bakery at the grocery store. Chocolate ice. Their sweet scents now combined with a lingering smell of microwave egg rolls. Mike didn't like egg rolls, but the fried smell was far better than any smell he encountered at the pizzeria. The pizzeria, Mike has thought. The job was going to be nothing but a pain in the butt. Who knew it would have such an effect on his dreams? Mike hasn't felt so buoyed in years. He wasn't sure he ever felt this way, at least not in 13 years. Max lets out a soft snore. Mike steps over to the TV and turns it off. Then he touches Max's shoulders, barely, just a brush against the dark purple fabric of her blouse. She raises her head with a snort, wiping drool from her mouth, and yawns. When she spots Mike, she quickly sets up with her finger, combs her long hair, then she wipes her sleep from her eyes. Max's cheeks look flustered. He hoped she wasn't coming down with something. She was the best make bed, the most affordable sitter he found for Abby. How'd it go? Max asks. Mike thought again about the dream. He lifts one shoulder. It was interesting. Not the best job in the world, but I need it, like a reference for the judge who might try and take He waves a hand. Never mind. Max nods, then quickly looks away from Mike. Weird. He's never seen her act so skittish. You want a donut? Mike asked. No thanks. Max's response was flat. Weird again. Wasn't exactly Miss Bubbly, but she was usually good for some sarcasm or sass, and she always looked him in the eye. Why was she avoiding his gaze? Mike frowned. I do intend to pay you, at some point. He picks up the donut bag. You sure you don't want a donut? Advance against your pay? He tried to grin. Mike shook her head. She didn't smile. It's okay, she said. I know where you live. Mike chuckles. Max didn't. Max gathers her stuff. Mike thought her posture was off, a little hunch. Maybe she was sick. You feeling okay? Mike says. Oh my god. Shut up these pages. Oh my god. This is wrong with books. They're so together. Okay. Max startled. Her flush depended. Huh? Yeah, sure, I'm fine. She wasn't fine. Something was off. Mike thought about pushing to see what was up, but he had his own stuff to think about. See you tonight, Mike asked. Max gave a half nod. She looked at Mike and started to open her mouth. Then she closed it. For several long seconds, Mike and Max looked at each other. Out of the blue and for the first time, Max thought. Max is a pretty girl. Mike has always had too much going on to think about Max as pretty. She was just his babysitter. Now she looked like a babysitter who had something to say. Was she going to quit? Mike held his breath and waited. Finally, Max spoke. She's a really good kid, you know, she said. Huh? That was not what Mike expected at all. What did Max mean by this? Mike didn't get the chance to ask Mike as Max was already on the door. Abby's room was bright with an early morning sunshine. She felt as if warming her closed eyelids, but she wasn't ready to open her eyes yet. Abby hugged the dolphin clothes and burrowed deep in over the covers. She wanted to spend just a few more minutes with her friends. Abby could be with her friends when her eyes were open too, but sometimes it's easier to hang out with them when she was sleeping or when she was just going into or out of sleep. Abby heard Mike open the door and walk over to her bed. Not ready to talk to her brother, Abby pretended she was asleep. Abby listens to Mike walking to her bed. She concentrates on keeping her breathing slow and even. The mattress dips as Mike lowers himself to the edge of her bed. What was he doing? Abby couldn't remember the last time Mike had sat on the edge of her bed while she was sleeping or pretending to sleep. Tempted to open her eyes and find out what was going on, Abby decided to wait it out. She kept breathing slowly. When Mike reached out and brushed a lock of Abby's hair from her cheek, she wasn't sure she took it a little. But maybe she didn't, because Mike didn't seem to notice. He smoothed her hair and stayed where he was. Okay, that's enough. Abby opened her eyes. Hey, Abs, Mike said. Hey. Abby looked at her brother. Something was different about him. He didn't look as tense as usual. He looked happy. No, not quite, but something. Mike stood. I need to go get a shower. Then we'll get you to school. Abby nodded. Mike ruffles Abby's hair. That was strange, too. He gave her a grin and left the room. Slouched in the corner of a cracked gray vinyl booth that smelled like lemon cleaners, Maxine puts her shoulder against the adjacent window. The window glass felt cool through the mud brown tap. She puts on this just for the meeting at Sparky's Diner. The top felt appropriate. It looked dirty, and the meeting made Maxine feel dirty. Usually, Maxine loves the aroma of the diner. That the distant mix of bacon and eggs and waffles and pancakes felt nice. She was probably one of the few people in the world who loved the smell of fried oil. Today, however, the food smells were making her feel queasy. Oh no. It was why she was here that was making her feel queasy. Ignoring the controversial buzzing glass dishes clinks and other clackers around her, Maxine stared into the window and watched the swirling black cloud rush toward the sad, faded Ocno building. The cloud shape was eerie skull-like, complete with what already looked like the vacant eye holes in a hungry maw. The cloud has already consumed the brightened sun that has dominated the morning, and now it looks like it wants to gobble up the old, run-down, greasy spoon. A sharp elbow jabs at Maxine's ribs. She turns and frowns at her brother. Space, she said. She didn't have to say more. Jeff understood her shorthand. He scoots a few inches away from her. Even though Jeff was 10 years older, the two of them were close. When Maxine was little, both of their parents had worked two jobs. Jeff has been more of a brother than to Maxine. He's been something closer to a strange dad, even if he was a screw up at it at 10. Jeff hasn't known squat about taking care of a baby in the weeks after Maxine's mom, maternity leave has ended. Jeff has done his best, even though he lost his sister more than once. Nearly drowned her, dropped her, scaled her, and fed her more candy than nutritious food. It was a wonder that Maxine has survived. Sorry, Jeff said in a tone that made it clear he wasn't. He picked up a paper-covered straw and tore off the end of the wrapper, pulling the paper just a half inch. He pushed the straw to his lip and blew it, shooting the paper wrapper at Maxine's face. It hits her in the nose. Maxine sighs and glares at Jeff. Eh? Jeff snores out a laugh. He elbows Maxine again, but this time on purpose. Maxine sighs once more and shakes her head. Movement from the other side of the table catches her attention. She looks at the other side of the scar penguin table, at the jump sitting on the opposite side of the booth. The man's name was Doug. Just Doug. He said when he introduces himself, Doug was supposedly a lawyer. What kind of lawyer only went by his first name? A Scuss lawyer? That's what kind? She noticed Doug was staring at her breast as he slurps a cup of coffee, to which she was watching him at four cream and six packet of sugar just a few minutes before. She immediately lowered her gaze and crossed her arms over her chest. Total sleazeball, Maxine thought. What was she doing here? Maxine glances at Jeff. He was sucking his soda noisily. She could feel his knee bouncing under the table. She knows he felt as awkwardness as she did, but probably for different reasons. Maxine loved her brother, and she thought he had a lot going for him. Having gotten more of their mother's lick than their father's, Jeff's hair was sandy brown, and his features were small and balanced. His features, however, did not fit his size. At a good size 6 foot two, Jeff's body was too large for his small face. Even so, Maxine thought he was cute. He was kind of too. He had a big heart. Jeff, however, was the king of bad choices. He's already done time twice for really minor stuff. Car theft, breaking and entering. He couldn't seem to hold on to a job. He really shouldn't have let him talk her into this, or anything for that matter. Maxine already felt terrible about what she'd done. She didn't want to do anything worse, or anything for that matter. Max Outside, the rain starts tapping on the window. Maxine nudges. Jeff, move, she said. She needs to get out of here. Before Jeff could even twitch, a clamorous crash cuts through the normal diner hub as Maxine's head jerks to the left as she sought the source of the sound. Jeff and Doug looked into the direction too. Doug had swirled his neck to look over his shoulder. Sparky's eating area was arranged in a C shape around the kitchen, which took up the third of the building octagon. A square off counter crackled into the cook's domain, from which came from a constant din of sizzling, banging, and shouting, and booth light of the outing wall of the building. The door was at the end of the bowing leg of the C. The racking that has cancelled out everything else in the diner was an explosion of broken dishes that apparently has fallen from a busboy very full of trays. The boy actually had a sad looking 30s something going, permanently bald, was mumbling something Maxine couldn't hear as he drops to his knees to clean up the mess. Standing over him was a pretty woman with an ash blonde, no doubt from a bottle, pixie cut. Jane, Mike's aunt. Probably a defense of the storm kicking outside the diner. Jane wore a pink pantsuit with matching high heels. She looks prim and proper, but Maxine knew she wasn't. Hand on hip, Jane deliberately stomps on the broken glass beneath her feet. She would narrowly avoid the busboy's fingers. Max had a feeling the miss was an accident. Now you watch where you're going, Jane screeched. She kicks a shard of broken glass on the busboy's shoes. The busboy glances at Jane as she flounces away from him. Jane heads directly towards the booth Maxine really didn't want to be in. She couldn't escape though, now that Jane was here. It was too late. Nearly everyone in the place has frozen when they heard the dish explosion, and now most of the diners were returning to their food. Many pair of eyes tracked Jane's progress. Her diva-like dramatics were designed to put her in the limelight. She made a point to huff dramatically as she moved on. Her high heels made emphatic little tapping sounds on the diner. Scuff, burgundy, linoleum. Jane reaches her booth and slits in the next to Doug. When she didn't have enough space, she shot Doug a look, and he appeared to attempt to let some air out of the balloon of his body. He screws himself against the window. Before anyone says anything, Jane said as she settled himself, I have somewhere I have to be, so let's make this quick. A tall, lanky, beard-haired teen wearing a Sparky's uniform shirt and a half-white apron tied around his waist. Maxine knew his name. It was Ness. He was Sparky's son. Approached the table. Hey there, welcome to Sparky's. Ness lifts a hand towards Maxine and gave her a little smile. She returns the smile. Can I start you folks off with some appetite? We're not eating, Jane says. Well, that's no fun, Ness says. He leans towards Jane and gives her a wink. You know what they say. Lunch is the most important meal of the day. I thought that was breakfast, Jeff says. He frowns as he thinks it's hard on the subject. Maxine mentally shakes her head. Her brother wasn't sweet, but he wasn't all the bright. Some people say that, Ness says, but it's just a theory. He grins. James narrows her eyes and looks at Ness like he was a gnat. Are you getting paid by the word, or can we have a minute? Ness's grin drops, so did the rest of his face. He shrugs away from the booth. Jane curls her lips as Ness retreats back. Her lips were painted in the color that matched her pantsuit. It wasn't a good look. Jane shifts her attention to the booth companions. Now, where were we? Oh, right. No one answered. Jane skewed Maxine with her best Cruella de Vil look. Oh, you were about to tell me what a miserable failure you are. Before Maxine could open her mouth to tell Jane just what to do with herself, Jeff leaned over the table. He jabbed a finger in Jeff's direction. Hey, screw you, lady, Jeff said. Maxine felt a surge of care for her brother. He was sweet and kind, but he always turned into a bulldog when anyone tried to mess with Maxine. My sister went over every inch of that dump 100 times, Jeff said. If there was something to find, she would have found it. He slaps a hand on the table. Now pay up. Jeff raises an eye. Jane raises an eyebrow. Jeff, I'm sorry. You said 200, Jeff said. Maxine, feeling usually meek, probably because of the guilt that has been strangling her ever since she agreed to do what Jane wanted done, spoke off softly. We had a deal, she told Jane. Jane tilted her head to one side and slid her gaze up and down Maxine's torso. Maxine has kept to herself from looking down to be sure she didn't have a stain or something. Yes, Jane said. Finally, the deal was that you find me hard-proof for criminal endangerment, something actionable. Instead, I heard from you is about what a nice kid my niece is and how my nephew sleeps a lot. He really does, though, Maxine says. Jane bangs a fist on the table. Jeff's soda glass shitters and Doug's coffee slosh. His discard little creamer cups, sugar packets, hop across the table like startled frogs. Sleeping is not a crime, Jane shouts. Head at the diner counter and nearly Booth swivels to stare at Jane. She clearly didn't notice or cared. Jeff ignores Jane. His gaze was on Doug. Maxine looked at the lawyer. He was red in the face, and his eyes looked like they were going to explode out of his head. Hey, dude, Jeff said to Doug. You okay? Doug's mouth begins to move as he was trying to word out the spit. I just realized, Doug said. He worked on his mouth trying again as he was trying to clear his throat. I probably shouldn't be hearing any of this. I probably shouldn't be here at all. He looked around wildly as he was trying to seek rescue. He began scooting towards Jane as he could hip scoot out the booth and flee. Jane raises a hand towards Doug. Stay, she commands. Doug stays. Maxine felt like he should get a treat or something. Jane looks from Maxine to Jeff. No one spoke. Maxine just wanted the whole thing to be over with. She didn't even care if she got the money Jane has promised. She never should have agreed to search for dirt on Mike. Sure, Maxine needed the cash. She always needed the cash. And yes, she was annoyed with Mike because he never bothered to look at her. Really look at her, but well, I guess we're done here, Jane said. Unless either of you got some bright ideas, which I do realize it's unlikely. Jeff pipes up. Why don't we just kill him? Maxine shouts at her brother with a look. Was he serious? She couldn't tell Jeff was kind, yes, but he had the comic book view of life. There was his people and everyone else. Mike was part of everyone else in Jeff's view. Might have been disposable. Doug tries to shove Jane out of his way with a big soft shovel. He half attempted to stand in the booth. Jane immediately grabs his tie, yanking him down, and uses the flat of her hand to shove him back into place. He didn't resist her. He retreated towards the window. Jane looks at Jeff with an expression somehow similar to approval. Tempting, Jane says, but no. Not thinking before opening her mouth, Maxine whispers, his job. Jane turns towards Maxine and leaps forward. Speak up, honey. The word honey was tripled rap in sarcasm. Hating herself, but apparently unable to stop herself, Maxine raises her voice and continues, well, Mike was saying how he really needed this new job, so he can look good on paper for the judge. Jane snorts. My nephew, the actress? That's all very fascinating there, but I'm not here to plan. Maxine glances at Jeff. He returns her gaze and he grins. He looks back toward at Jane. We toss the pace. Jeff says. Jane in return raises her eyebrows, clearly surprised that Jeff has said something interesting. Go on, she says. Jeff shoves aside his soda glass and puts both hands and palms down on the table. Mike, a security guard, right? His job is to make sure no one gets in. So, he looks from Jane to Maxine and back to Jane. We get in. Mess the place up good, help ourselves to whatever we can find along the way. Jeff lifts his finger and points at Jane. Your nephew gets canned. Jeff gives you the kid. He hesitates, then leans back, crosses his arms. You give us $2,000. Jane pulls in her chin and gives Jeff as if look. It's 200, she says. Jeff shook his head. 200 was for going through his underwear drawer. We're talking about breaking and entering, destroying private property. Theft, that's like 5 years minimum. Probably more like 10, Doug inserts. Jane shots Doug in death glare. Then she taps on the pink painted nail on the booth tabletops. The skin on the outer edges of her eyes pulling. 1,000, Jane says. Jeff looks at Maxine. She leans away from him, attempting to refuse with the window. Or perhaps pass right through it. She couldn't believe she was having anything to do with any of this. Still, she gave Jeff a minuscule nod. Jeff looks at Jane. Okay, he said. Jane stands up, adjusting the hem of her packsuit jacket. She bends forward across the booth table. She leans in close, just an inch from Jeff's face. Maxine got a whiff of Jane's perfume. It was sharp and cutting, like it was fusion with pepper and grapefruit. It was low, menacing tones. Jane spoke. Do it soon, and don't mess it up. Jane twists her lips. I mean, do mess it up. She's pointing at the table, but don't you mess this up. James stalks off. Doug hefts himself off the booth bench. Maxine watches Doug trail in Jane's wake. Maxine looks at her brother, clearly confused. Jeff was looking at the spot of the table that Jane has painted to. Maxine fed up with everything, snaps Jeff's finger. He frowns at her, and still baffled, she gave him her best moron look and sighed. Chapter 9. Thunder rattles at Mike's bedroom as the walls begin to crackle. His heard heavy rain drop rat-ta-ta at the window pane behind his blackout curtains. The brilliant sunlight that has ushered in the day had thrown in the towel when heavy storm clouds had descended on the town. Just before lunch, since the day has been dark and dreary. Mike's mood has similarly changed. The surge of optimism Mike has felt at the start of the day has diminished as the day has gone. He wanted it back, and he had a plan to reclaim it. Planting his feet white on his bouncy mattress, one foot close to the edge, Mike reached up to try to untape his Nebraska poster from the ceiling over to the bed. He managed to slide his finger under the one edge of the thick of the paper. What are you doing? Abby's voice came from the right of the hill of another clamor of the thunder. The combination of the boom and her unexpected appearance startled Mike. Mike falls and his foot slipped off the edge of the bed. Mike went into a tumbling. His finger caught a big chunk of the poster and took the chunk with him off to the floor. Having managed to land head and shoulders first, Mike shifts to his rump and rubs his head. He looks towards his doorway. Abby stood just a foot inside Mike's room, dressed in her usual overalls. Today was bright blue. She wore Mike's Freddy Fazbear security vest. Even though Mike was annoyed by the interruption and his torn poster, he had to admit Abby looked adorable in the vest, like she was playing dress up, something he'd never seen her do before. Mike looks into his shoulders. Did you want something, Abby? He asked. Abby looks up to the ceiling and Mike's gaze follows her. The part of the poster he hasn't ripped off dangles down towards the bed. The remaining bit reads, Pinning for fun. Mike sighs. He points at Abby. All right, come on, take it off. I need to go to work. Abby nods. I know, I'm coming with you. Mike grunts and stands up. He presses a hand to his temple. Another headache was coming on. It hasn't just been his collision with the floor. His mood has been spiraling downward all day. And now, even though he had a plan to retrieve the hope he felt earlier, he dreaded having to go back to the spooky restaurant. He wasn't up for Abby's games. Abby, please, Mike said. He held out a hand. Just give me the vest. Abby didn't move, so Mike walked over to her and reached for the vest. Abby, stepped back. No, Abby shouted. Mike really wanted to scream at her. He hated when she got like this. Summering what little patience he had available to him, which wasn't much, Mike kneeled in front of Abby. He took a second to make sure that when he spoke he wouldn't explode. Then he said in what he hoped was a calm but firm tone, "Give me the vest now." Abby makes a face. Then she mimics him. "I'm coming with you." Mike heard the front door bang open, even from down the halls. The sound of Max's footsteps were clear. The tap tap was joined by a fluttering noise, given the thundering of the rain of the roof overhead. Mike guessed that Max was shaking out her umbrella. "Hello?" Max called out. Abby turns towards the hallway, Mike lunching at her. When Maxine heard Abby shriek, she rushes toward the hallway, looking down the length of the narrow empty space. Maxine starts forward. Was Abby really in trouble, or was she just having been one of her? Abby screams again as she did. Mike, holding a wildly flaring Abby in his arms, steps into view. So that's the question answered. Maxine wipes rain off her face. The umbrella hasn't been much help in the morning storm as she watches Mike carry his sister to her own room. Mike sets Abby down as she spuns away from him. He grabs the vest she was wearing and pulls it off. He quickly slams Abby's door and locks it. Abby continues to caterwaul from in her bedroom. Most of her noise is just general wailing, but mixed in with some impressive beyond her age swear words and a few scratching opinions of her brother. Maxine agreed with a few of them. Panting, Mike looked down at the halls and met Maxine's gaze. "Hey, Max," he said. He lifted a hand, signaling for him to stop. Mike pointed at Abby's closed door. He acted like he couldn't hear any of the insults and yowling, reaching to the flimsy wood barrier. "She's all yours," Mike said. Max raised an eyebrow and quirked her lips. "Great." When Mike got to work, he didn't waste any time freaking himself out by looking around the pizzeria. The lobby and hallway looked the same as they always do the day before. He assumed everything else was status quo too, as if it wasn't. He didn't want to know about it. As soon as Mike entered the office and closed the door behind him, he didn't want to bother with the moving, the filming, and cabinets because he felt silly for doing it the night before. He shed his wet blanket and took his backpack to the desk. Then he made his preparations. Setups didn't take long. Within 10 minutes, Mike was planting himself in the office desk chair. Once there, Mike swept his gaze over all the monitors. All the power was on as it could get, and he had a clear view of everything on the monitors, inside and out. A thundercrack assaulted the pizzeria building, grown as a protest. Mike's attention lands on the main exterior cameras. He watches a river rainwater flow out the parking lot into the street. Satisfied that was all well with the pizzeria, Mike took his pill and turns on the cassette and touches his paperback as it was a talisman. Then he leans forward and looks at the Nebraska poster, which he managed to repair, shoddily, and tape to the wall opposite side of the desk. Mike turns up the volume on the cassette player so he can jump the sound of the thunderstorms. Chirping birds, rustling tree branches in a gurgling stream. Mike softens his gaze and allows the pine trees to repair and tear the sways. As the pine needles shimmer and Mike's eyes lose their focus, his lids flutter, then they drop. The tear marrying the pine trees were gone. They moved seemingly in the wind, one flowing waves of gauzy greens. Mike relaxed into the soothing sound of the breeze, but he stiffened when thunder musker and waves into the breeze, swiftly rhythm. The sun flittering through the trees began to flicker, or was that the light in the office? Mark's part of Mike's consciousness was still aware of where he was in his walking state, but it was hanging on tensionally. Mike determined to fall into the reality of the pine forest, blurred all the sounds he was hearing. He woke up into the thunder of the creaking tree branches. He heard a crackling hiss and a pop. He braided the screech of the sounds in the cackle of the brightening pines needles. The sun, for 1 second, blinded Mike's face in warmth, and then disappeared once again, letting cool shades slip over him in and out. The light blinked. The confusion shocked them and continued, and Mike frowned. What was that lower sound off in the distance? Was that music? Mike's awareness succumbed into the fog of the sleep. He found himself in a series of quick take impressions. An orange toy plane through the air flies, ketchup swirls, time and tires spin on gravel. Mike runs, shoving aside branches that once again slap his face. Mike pounds through the forest. His movements are familiar, practiced, but something strange feels off. Bursting out of the trees, Mike looks down at the road just in time to see the black car disappear. But this time, it's different. Children's laughter bubble against Mike. He turns. As Mike rotates again, his gaze drops. He's surprised as he's realizing he's looking down at his adult body. But this is different. The children aren't there. Mike looks at the five children. They were there as the last time he saw them. Mike watches the children, but he doesn't approach them. They watch him in return. What now? Understanding clearly that he's in a dream, that it's diverging from its norm. Mike hesitates. Then he speaks. Please, Mike says to the children, don't run. I just want to know what you saw. The blond boy narrows his cold blue eyes at Mike. His upper lip lifts into a semi sneer. I'm begging you, Mike says. Who took my brother? The blond boy expression doesn't change. The others ignore Mike. Mike runs a hand, his hair all flustered. Why won't the kids tell me anything? He takes a step forward. He begins to raise his voice. Who took Garrett? Mike shouts at the children. They vote. No, Mike yells, facing the same direction that he was before. Mike makes an instant decision this time. He chases the boy with the paper hook. Now that Mike is all adult size, he can easily outrun the small child. The boy has reddish hair, and Mike keeps his gaze locked on the hair as he runs. Evenly racing over the forest uneven ground, Mike quickly closes the distance. Almost upon the boy, Mike reaches for the kid's shoulder as the boy spins around. Suddenly, Mike sees a flash of silver. The paper hook is swinging through the air. Something sharp stings on Mike's arm. He staggers back, stunned. Mike looks down at his arm. His shirt sleeve gabbed open. The material is slashed apart. A narrow ribbon of red appears on Mike's skin. Shocked, Mike looks back at the red-haired boy. The boy who freckles face had a pretty little nose and soft cheeks. Look at Mike with staggering, fearsome green eyes. The boy opens his mouth and unleashes a red, distorted, mechanical shriek. Mike recoils as he opens his eyes. Mike's goggle at the overhead lights. They were flashing off with dizziness and quickness. Looking away from the lights, Mike slams his palm over his ears because the lights were half of the assaults on his senses. Screeching feedback were blaring from the intercoms and the sitting over the desk. Mike shifted his focus on the CCTV monitors. He gaped at them. The monitors had gone haywire. Some of the screens were constantly random flash clutter of lights. Some were streaming behind the different codes, which were intertwined with twisted, distorted image. Then abruptly, an '80s song blasted from the speakers. Mike jolted at the sound, nearly falling from his chair, throughout on the arm to keep him steady. Mike knocked the pill bottle to the floor. The cap wasn't on tight. The little white pills fallen over. As Mike's gaze shot from the pills up to the intercom, he grabbed his head with both hands. Stop! Mike yelled, even though his hair strikes wasn't going to help. Mike, he couldn't help himself. But he couldn't. His senses were saturated. He was totally overwhelmed. Standing, Mike spun, one way and then the other. What should he do? On the verge of totally losing it, Mike got help from the memory banks. His brain provided him with an inner Raglan replay. Fair warning, Raglan's voice said in Mike's head. The power could be a bit screwy. If you have any issues, you'll find a system breaker in the main office. Just give it a flip. Mike stood staring to the turn of the circuit box. Mike did a double take. His gaze flitted toward the window in the office door. The frosted glass looked perfectly normal. Mike could see well through the glass to assure himself that nothing was out there. But Had it been, Mike could have sworn he just got in a glimpse of One Eye watching him through the glass. One eye and one eye patch. Could Mike shook his head. No way. He imagined probably because of his dream. The rock music stops and the lights start going on and off and even faster. That's enough. Given the frosted window, one more glance, nothing was there. Mike sprinted to the circuit breaker. He grabs the lever and shoves it downward. Everything went black. The building was filled with blessed silence. Even the thunder stopped. The red emergency bulb across the circuit box clicks on Mike. He leans back against the wall and tries to get a grip on himself. He once again took a deep breath, was covered in rascals. His pulse was so fast that it felt like a formula was racing against him in his veins. His ears were ringing from the razor assault. Mike stood in the near darkness for a few seconds. Then his skin prickled. The darkness was unfriendly, suffocating even. Mike puts his hands back on the lever. He shoves it upwards. A comforting ka-chunk lanes the office. Mike looks at the bank of the bulbs. They were dim, but they were steady. Stepping over to the desk, Mike looks at the monitors. They were back to normal. Mike exhales loudly. His pulse is back to normal. A buzzer revs up Mike's pulse again. The buzz came out one, twice, three times. Mike leans over and scans the monitors. He frowns. Centered in front of the entrance camera, a uniformed police officer stood in the steady rain, finger of the building doorbells. The thunder might have vibrated, but the storm was still dumping torrents of water of the pizzeria. Mike peered at the wavy CCTV feed. Between the poor resolution, the rain, and the officer's hooded poncho, Mike couldn't make out the officer's face. All you could see was pale fuzziness within the hood, even when the officer looked at the camera and waved. Bracing himself for whatever was going to come next, Mike pulled open one of the pizzeria's heavy entrance doors. He peered out of the rain and looked at the officer. Close up in real life, instead of the old hazy CCTV screen, the police officer's face was clear and it belonged to a woman. The female officer smiled at Mike. About time, she said in a pleasing voice. I was starting to think you fell asleep on the job. Mike, still disoriented by what happened in the office, was puzzled. Why is a cop at a pizzeria door? He blinked at the woman like an idiot. He couldn't seem to get his brain to engage properly. It didn't help that the unexpected cop at the door was a very pretty cop. Even though Mike couldn't see the woman's hair or body under the bulky red beard, he could see enough of her big blue eyes and her flustered cheeks and her wide mouth to find her look unsettling. Mike had little time or inclinations to date, often got flustered when he was around a pretty woman. A pretty cop was even more meddling, but he had to say something. Mike cleared his throat and managed, Can I help you, officer? Please. Pulling off her rain parka, the cop brushed a few strands of the streaked blonde hair from her pale face. The hair was shiny and appeared to be long, but currently confirmed in some kind of twist. The name's Vanessa. She said as she shook the water off the parka. Water sprayed Mike's pants. He could have cared less. Vanessa looks at Mike, and you must be. Not that Mike could see Vanessa's sleek hair and the slender but curvy figure in her snug dark blue police uniform. He was more tongue-tied. All he was capable of was more idiotic blinking. Vanessa smiles at Mike, with what might have been pity, or maybe she was trying to be friendly. The new security guard, she concluded. She glanced down at Mike's arm. You're bleeding, by the way. That surprised Mike so much that he said, What? But Vanessa points at Mike's arm. Your arm? Mike looks down at his arm, and his mouth drops open. He felt open so hard and so wide that his jaw made it open to the floor. Clearly remembering what happened in his dream, he couldn't believe what he was seeing. The sleeve of Mike's black shirt was cut cleanly around the forearm. The nice fabric was soaked in blood. That looks nasty, Vanessa says. Mike suddenly feels woozy. Yes, he said. He's wavered on his feet, not from the blood loss or anything. The cut was long, but it didn't look that deep. He was more dazed than badly injured. When Mike made like a swaying pine tree, Vanessa took charge. She briskly stepped past Mike and started striding across the lobby. She moved as if she owned the place. Come on, Vanessa flung back over her shoulder. I know where there's a first aid kit. Mike browse bunches. She does. Hello, hello. Oh, wow, we're already in chapter 10. We're gonna head to chapter 14. That's where we're gonna stop. Love what you done with the place, Vanessa says, fumbling with a roll of gauze. Mike glances over at her. She stood on the other side of the office, examining the pieced together pizza poster. Why Nebraska? She asked. When Mike didn't answer, Vanessa looks back at him. She watches him struggle to wrap the gauze around his injured arm. Need a hand with that? She asks. I'm fine, Mike says. Really? Mike looks down at the mess he was making with the gauze that Vanessa has pulled from a kit that has been stashed in the bottom drawer of the filing cabinets. He was pretty sure a 2-year-old could have done a better job at wrapping his wound, he signs. He clearly this was not something he could do on his own. Blushing, Mike holds out his arm toward Vanessa. She grins and crosses to the desk. Perching out the edge of the desk near the VCR, she leans over and removes the tangled mess Mike has made with the glass. Vanessa, Mike discovers, smells very good. Was it her perfume, her shampoo, lotion, whatever it was? It was a very nice combination of something flowery, along with vanilla and apples. Vanessa begins wrapping his arm efficiently. Her movements were very quick and precise. Mike hopes she can hear his heartbeat. It quickened when her cold, soft fingers brushed against his skin. While she worked, Vanessa started talking at a rapid-fire pace. I'm a certain EMT, you know. I did that first before I decided I'd rather be a cop. I didn't do rescues runs anymore, but if your heart ever gives out, I'll be the one you want to call, assuming you can still speak and hold a phone. Vanessa spoke so quickly that her words ran together. Mike had trouble keeping up. Her hands flew over his arm. She was acting almost manic. Nonplussed by pretty much everything about this unexpected cop, Mike was mostly perplexed by her familiarities with the pizzeria. So he said, You seem to know your way around. Vanessa's fingers jitter against the bandage, which was almost complete. She spoke quickly again. Freddy's is on my beat. I like to stay well informed. She looks up and gazes around. I also loved this place when I was a kid. Vanessa tugs on the gauze, tightening it. Really tightening it. Mike grunts. That should do it, Vanessa says. She pats her upper arm, then pushes off the desk and stands up. She extends a hand. Vanessa Shelley, she grins. Might as well finish our meat. Cute. Mike blinks at Vanessa. She laughs. Just kidding, but seriously. She shoves her head forward forcefully. Let's see if we can do this. Vanessa Shelley, she repeats. Mike was a little reluctant to take her hand. She was such a powerhouse that he wouldn't have been surprised if he was lost his hand in the process of shaking hers. Mike took Vanessa's hand. She shook it twice, viciously, as he said, Mike Smith. Pleasure to meet you, Mike, Vanessa says. Squeaking his hand once before she let it go, she stepped back and looked up the intercom before reading and returning to her gaze to Mike's face. Unnervingly speaking in a totally different tone of voice, Vanessa said, So, what are you going to do this evening, Mike? Gone was the breakneck light chatter. Her tone was measured and low, all cop. Mike fidgeted as Vanessa's eyes narrowed. She seemed to be studying him with suspicion. The hell? Mike, not sure how to respond to the out of the blue, hard right turn. Mike could say, What? Vanessa's eyes narrowed even more. A muscle at her jawline twitched. Are you alright? She repeated. More slowly as she was speaking to a person with the IQ of 10. As in, are you okay? Are you cool? Is everything clear sympathetic? Uh-huh. Mike crosses his arms, ignoring the pain in his left forearm. I know what all right means, okay? He said. Vanessa Demers flips again. She smiles brightly and begins quickly speaking once more. Hey, that's great. Still talking fast. She drops a smile. She continues. Did you also know that your eyes are bloodshot and pupils are dilated and your heart rate is to the roof? All of this is aside from the gash of your arm, which is, let's be honest, is pretty dang bizarre. You've been acting quite shifty since the moment we met. Mike stares at Vanessa open mouthed. Vanessa puts her hands on her utility belt. The leader creaks. Yes, she whispers with mock tolerance. Mike sighs. What was the right way to go here? He couldn't tell her about his dream, obviously, but maybe he should be honest to the point. It's really been a really weird night, he said. Vanessa taps her blunt, unpolished nails on her baton. She eyes Mike for a long, disconcerting moment. Then something invisible flips the switch. Vanessa's cop mode deactivates. She flashes a wide, warm smile at Mike and says, Sounds like Freddy's. Mike was now totally mystified. What did she mean by that? Mike's befuddlement must have shown on his face. Vanessa lets out a short laugh and wave an arm to indicate the building across them. This place, it gets the people. Vanessa leans toward Mike. That's why you're gonna quit. The light tone was gone. She was cop serious. Mike felt like he was being spun on the merry-go-round. What? Spun? Really? Oh yeah, security horrors never last long. It's a fact, very long fact. Mike had no idea what to make of that. The only thing he could think of was to say, maybe I'm different. Vanessa studied Mike. Her eyes darkened and her face went still. She looked like she'd fallen down a dark, deep rabbit hole of introspection. Then the dark Vanessa cloud cleared. The sun came back to her face. She beamed at Mike. So have you met them yet? Met who? Then, Vanessa said, you know, Freddie, Bonnie, Chica, Foxy. Mike gabs at her. Vanessa smiles at his clueless. She turns toward the door, then looks back at Mike and motions for him to follow her. Come on, she said. The dining room was dim, but its lights were on strangely. When Vanessa had used the lights near the archway, it had worked. Even in the better lights toward the dining room was still not one of Mike's favorite places. There was something haunting about the open space area. The expanse of crusty red stage curtains. Vanessa didn't seem to be bothered by any of these things that made Mike's skin crawl. She strode her palms confidently and purposefully toward the stage. Mike trailed behind her, hanging back enough to soothe himself, but not far enough to look like a total coward. Attempting to distract himself from his nerves, Mike called to her. So, what are the other reasons? Vanessa glanced over her shoulder. Huh? You said I was going to quit my job because this place would get to me, among other reasons. He reminded her, what reasons? Vanessa stops. They reach to the stage, and she's now stood in front of the main stage. Mike sidles away from its end, in front of the small purple curtain stage. Vanessa faces Mike. She puts her hands on her hip. Something flashes in her eyes. Annoyance? Challenge? You tell me, she says. Is this where you see yourself in 10 years? How about 20 years? Look down the line. What do you see? I mean, who knows? Maybe the benefits are great. Mike felt like he got whiplash every time Vanessa smoked or even spoke, even though the peniment pace of the interactions with her was giving him a headache. He laughed. Vanessa smiled. Didn't think so. She looked into her own head, adding to the thing with those kids going missing. It felt like Vanessa had just kicked Mike in the shoulder buttocks. He struggled to get his next breath in. What did you just say? He asked. Vanessa acted like she hadn't heard the question before. Walking away from Mike, she strode to the wall and stood in front of the red Showtime button. Prepare to have your mind blown, Vanessa says. Vanessa hits the big red button. The instant she did, it felt like a thousand things happened at once. The first thing to get Mike's attention was the swish of the purple curtain. They swung apart, and Mike yelps and scuttles backwards. The pirate fox animatronic was lurching forward out of the darkness. It shot to the edge of the stage, just inches from where Mike had just been standing. At the same time, the main curtain rose open. The eerie foot of the sun lit up with color. Floodlights came out shooting toward the stage. As 80s music began to play from the speakers, Mike recognized it easily. It was the same song he heard in the office. The deranged looking fox that had nearly scared the pants off Mike was the same fox he'd seen in the motions. He especially couldn't take his eyes off the gleaming silver hook. which cut through the air over as the fox gyrated. When the fox looked down at Mike, or at least it seemed like the fox looked at them, Mike finally moved. He stepped over to join Vanessa, who now was a stood center on the base on the main stage. Mike looked up at the stage, and there were the rest of the characters Mike had seen in the poster. The yellow chick with the cupcake, the blue bunny with the guitar, the brown bear with the bow tie and top hat. Mike put all the names to a toothy smile. Foxy, Chica, Bonnie, Freddy rocking out. His gaze locked on the bopping and twirling animatronics. Mike couldn't decide whether to be entertained, repulsed, or sympathetic. The display was once again fascinating, disgusting, and maybe sad. Maybe when they were been in their heydays, bright and prime, it was all in their glory. The animatronics might have been fun to watch. Now they're all molded and filthy. The fur, which was rotting, was riddled with holes, and those holes the metal and skeletons beneath were rusting. Wires poked out and gaped in the floor, and animatronic mechanisms were chunky, glitchy, and noisy. The bunny Bonnie's guitar was faded, battered, and bent. This is, Mike tried, the best thing you've seen in your entire life? Vanessa filled in. I was gonna say deeply dramatic, Mike says, shaking his head. But as a shot, it's on Mike as he shrugs. Vanessa returns the shrug, and then she holds out her hand. Want to dance? Mike stares at Vanessa's hand. Was she serious? He wasn't going to find out because while he tried to work out the answer to her question, a burst of spark explodes from Bonnie's guitar. At the same time, the music sputters and screeches to a jarring stop. Red hot and bursting with bright color, sparks spewed from the stage as a few sizzling bites of the heat hit the black and white checked dining room floor. The floodlights went on and the swirling lights were gone. The curtains began to close. Thank God Mike couldn't take his eyes off. In the sudden rig animatronics, his gaze went from the others, landing finally on Freddy. The curtains were sweeping together in front of the bear. As they did, Freddy's gaze seemed to shift as it appeared that the bear was staring directly at Mike. The curtains finally finished closing. Mike shivered. Surely the animatronics could have made a direct eye contact with Mike. They weren't that sensitive, were they? Maybe next time, Vanessa says. Mike pulled the gaze from the closed curtains. He looked at Vanessa. She was expressionless. He couldn't read her. Vanessa headed toward the archway. Mike starts to follow her, but he felt compelled to check the closed curtain again. They remained shut, but they swayed back and forth ever so slightly. Now that all the blinded lights were out, the curtains were engulfed in shadows. Mike felt goosebumps on his arms. He rubbed them in the gesture brought back what Vanessa said earlier. Hurrying after Vanessa, who was still heading toward the lobby, Mike called out, "You said some kids were missing?" Vanessa stops, and she turns to look at Mike. She cocks her head, and she found Mike interesting, or maybe dense. "Sure," she said, "back in the 80s." "What happened to them?" Mike asked. Vanessa crosses her arms. It was big news. She made a face that Mike couldn't interpret. It was why the place shut down, she explained. Mike felt like the floor under her feet was falling away. What? Glancing at his face, Vanessa says, "Wow, you really didn't do your homework, did you?" She looks him up and down as if mock disapproval. Or maybe her disapproval was real, she thought, as she shook her head. "And you're not even wearing your badge." "Huh? Badge? What badge?" Mike was pretty sure Vanessa had seen his face arranged in expressions of totally vapid ignorance more than pretty much anyone has seen before, and that's saying a lot. Raising an eyebrow at him, she motioned for him to follow her as she veered away from the arc and headed towards the far side of the dining area. Scurrying around an overturned table and a pile of chairs, Vanessa led him into the arcade. Their footsteps made a pile of chairs, Vanessa leading into the tisking sound as their feet scuttled over the dusty chairs, and they kicked the floor and kicked the debris. The dry smell of dust mushrooms go around them. At the front edge of the arcade, a long, thick, dusk glass wall counter closes a display of the script game prizes. Mounted of a moldy, limp, faded plush animals lay next to the clustered, cracked plastic toys and crusty Freddy stuff. Mike shot had and mugs, printed in rings and figurine posters. When they reached the counter, Vanessa went behind it and slid open a cabinet door and taps and whooshes. She wishes out for some wasted prizes. Mike looks at her finger and kicks out the dusty green spores and tosses aside what looks like a dead baby animal. He wanted to tell her to stop what she was doing, but was too disconcerting. Before Mike could speak, Vanessa pulls out her hand out of the display. Got it, she said triumphantly. She held up her red plastic tub filled with play badges. Mike took a step closer and looked at them. The plastic in bells reads Freddy's Honorable Security. Vanessa plucks out the badge from the tub and steps over to Mike, still in the vest that, in spite of everything that has happened tonight, he still wore it. Vanessa pins the badge to it. Vanessa pats Mike's shoulder and then steps back. Her gaze lifts the face and then drops again. There, she says in a tone that came across as oddly resigned. Now you're official. The words sound tired, and her tone drops at the end of the sentence. Vanessa seems to be almost sad. Why? Mike opens his mouth to ask what was upsetting her, but before any words came out, the beep beep of his watch alarm cuts to the moment. It acted like a thrown bucket of cold water, putting a harsh end to the night. Vanessa looks at her own watch. Mike knew it was read 6 a.m. That's what the alarm was for. Looks like our time is up, Vanessa says. She gave Mike a weirdly somber smile. Come on, let's go get your stuff. I'll walk you out. The storm has finally thrown in the towel. Flat, ashen clouds lay supine over the pizzeria, as if it spent a depleted between narrow gaps in the clouds. It hinted on the day coming sun sidled over the top distant trees, casting surreal golden lights over the wet black sheen of the pizzeria parking lot. Mike's car door was protesting its retirement movement with a clunking groan when an engine groaned and the swishish of tires rolled through the shallow rain puddles, turned Mike around. Vanessa's black and white cruiser rolls through a stop behind him. She lowers her window. If you want, Vanessa calls out, I can check in time for time. I know how lonely these nights can be. Mike keeps his face neutral, but instantly he cringes. He likes Vanessa, even though her freckled personality made his head spin. The last thing he needed though was her dropping in unannounced. It would totally mess up his nighttime routine. Mike realizes Vanessa was watching him with a bemused quirk of the lips and a raised eyebrow. He spoke quickly. I'll keep myself busy. Vanessa lifts her gaze on him for several long, inscrutable seconds, then she shrugs. Some friendly advice? She nearly rolls her eyes. Don't let this place get to you. Just do your job, and you'll be fine. Vanessa's intense stare and her hesitation before the word "fine" lands on Mike, like a physical blow, not a hard one, more like a warning tab, a shot across the bow. It felt like Vanessa's words were more like a threat than advice. Ignoring the tightening in the gut, Mike says lightly, "Sounds good." Vanessa gave Mike a friendly wave that was more like a flip flop again. Mike couldn't keep up. Then she raises her window and she looks straight ahead and drove out of the parking lot. Mike watches the cruiser tail lights for a couple seconds before getting in his car. As he gets to close his car out, it lets out a grinding sound. He thought he caught a hint of movement by the pizzeria. Mike leans forward to look through the windshields. Unfortunately, he couldn't see much. He thinks the pine needles were stuck to the wet glass, and Mike's view of the restaurant was obscure. He hesitates as he can consider whether he should get out of the car to investigate. As quickly as Mike thought about checking out what he'd seen, he dismisses the idea. The buildings were locked up tight. He was tired, and his arm hurt. Mike turns the ignition 4 times. Finally, the car starts. He clears the windshield with the wipers. He looks towards the Sovereign building again. It was still. Mike shrugged. His mind must have been just winding him up again. Chapter 11. Jeff watches the pathetic pile of rust lurch out of the parking lot. His heart rate, which has tripled when Mike has almost spotted him, settles back into the normal rhythm. As the junk heaps on the wind, which shows of the wheels, chug off down the road, Jeff presses back against the pizzeria warp sign. Immediately he yelps and steps away. He's forgotten the paint pudding would was still wet. Shaking off himself, Jeff digs into his pocket and pulls out his old flip phone. He punches in the number, one ring, click. After the click, all Jeff heard was silence. No, not even silence. His sister breathing came through the line, faint and uneven. Max? Yeah, the word was soft but cliff off, even with just one word. Jeff knew Max was on the edge. It's showtime, Jeff said. Soon as he gets back, get the guys and meet me here. I think I found a way in. Max said nothing. Jeff pressed the phone closer to his ear. He couldn't even hear Brady now. Max? Finally, Max appeared. Yeah, the tone was quite more edgier. The one word poked at Jeff's ear like a thorn. Time to get paid, Jeff said. Max sized in his ear, then hung up. Maxine drops her phone on the sofa and puts her face in her hands. How has she gotten herself into this? I'm not a bad person, Maxine mutters. She muffles into her palms. Her consciousness laughs at her and accuses herself. Then why would you agree to spy on Mike? Maxine shook her head as she feels the anger and hurt rise up with the feelings that she has goaded herself into betraying her best friend. He deserves it, she told herself when she acceded Jane's request to search his house. Sure, Mike was never rude to her, but he always said hello and goodbye and thank you. It was like Mike ignored her. He did interact with her. He never really saw her. If he did, he realized how she felt about him. Jane has caught Maxine on a bad day. The day Maxine has put on extra makeup and worn a new shirt in the hopes of catching Mike's eye. The day that Mike had looked right through her as usual. That's why she had agreed to do something that was so not who she was. Yeah, but then you're the one who suggested messing up his job. Her conscience prodded to her. Not exactly, she argued back. All I said was, Maxine's consciousness flew at her, and Maxine dropped her hands. She looked around the shabby little house and shook her head. Mike didn't deserve what was she and her brother and the others were about to do. But how could she stop now? I'm scummed, Maxine told herself. Jeff grinned when his crowbar easily snapped the old padlock. The brusque hunk of metal dropped to the concrete with a thunk, and Jeff reached out to grab the equally rusty vertical handle of the rolling steel door. The sun shone directly on the back of the pizzeria, and as it hit the still wet platforms of the pizzeria loading dock steam went upwards, the slithery mist made Jeff think of a graveyard scene in horror movies. He shivered and immediately shocked off the sensation, annoyed with himself. Putting on a swagger of confidence he was starting to lose. Jeff turned a face the man leaning against his old green pickup truck. Hank, heavy-set with long-grained sandy brown hair and a scruffy goatee to match, was lounging against the truck chromed grill. His thick forearms crossed over a large belly. Hank down-turned blue eyes studied Jeff like he couldn't decide whether to laugh at Jeff or kill him. Jeff has always been a little afraid of Hank, even more so today. Hank had an old wooden baseball bat resting on his beefy shoulders, and the way he twirled the bat was more than a little off-putting. Jeff shifted his gaze to Carl, Hank's son. Even though Jeff has known Carl for several years, they've done time together, both as juvie and adults. Jeff has to admit Carl intimidated him too. Dark hair, Carl's eyes has the same downward tilt as his dad's, but Carl's eyes were spaced wider apart, and they were brown like his mother's. Something about the way Carl's eyes squinted at the world, and the way his thin lips were usually pressed into a snarky smile, made Jeff nervous around Carl. Like Hank, Carl had a goatee, but was more sparser than his dad. That, Jeff thought, made Carl seem more dangerous. Right now, for instance, Carl was toying with a six-celled flashlight he had tucked in his belt. As he threw it, menacingly glances at Max, his German shepherd, Bonesy. Jeff thought that if Carl had been carrying a gun, he probably would have shot the dog. Jeff would never shoot a dog, especially Max's dog. But the dog was being in pain. He was barking his head off like he was announcing a coming apocalypse. Bonesy was in the pickup cab, and Max was standing by the driver's side door. Her face paled, and her lips were pressed tightly together. Hank saw the direction of his son's gaze, and turned to look at the spun-up dog. Bonesy was really going for it. Fraud was building up at the jaws as he barked and growled. Dog's gonna be a problem, Hank said. Hank once again said in his deep, scratchy voice. Carl keeps eyeing Bonesy. Yup, Carl said. His voice was higher pitched than his dad, but it had Carl's tone. Hank spunks the bat again, and then Daisy glanced around the nearby trees behind the pizzeria. There's a whole lot of noise, he said. Sure is, Carl agrees. Hank pushes across the truck grill and steps to open the driver's side window. He looks at Max. Told you not to bring the dog, he said. His tone was a little more threatening, but he didn't seem to faze Max. Max lifts her chin up and glares at Hank. Jeff knew that Max wasn't afraid of Hank or Carl. She'd known them, and Hank's wife, Darlene, since Max was a little kid, because they were neighbors. She thought of Hank and Darlene as an aunt and uncle. She told Jeff she tried to not think of about Carl at all. She put up with him. She didn't like him. Hank shifts his bat. Carl steps up next to his dad. He gave Max what Jeff thought was awfully close to a creepy leer. Jeff needed to get things under control. Stepping away from the now open loading dock door, Jeff took 3 long strides to reach the pickup. He pointed at Bonesy and shouted at Max, shut him up for now. He lifts up his crowbar, or I will. He said as several as he could. Max lifts an eyebrow at her brother, but she reaches into the pickup and puts her hands on Bonesy's shoulder. She leans to the window and begins to smoothly talk to her dog. Jeff couldn't make out the words. Whatever Max said worked, because Bonesy's barks began to stop at the back of his throat. Jeff quickly turns to Hank and Carl, reaching into the bed of the truck. Jeff grabs a large army green cowboy duffel bag. Come on, as he said as he was the boss. Jeff wasn't sure he was the boss of anything. Yeah, this was been his idea, but it's been the one to ask Hank and Carl for help. Now that they were getting ready to head inside, Jeff was feeling like he wasn't in charge as he wanted to be. Jeff motioned for the whole other men to follow him as he headed inside, back to the open, locking door. As he went, he saw Max getting to the pickup cab to get some things. Maxine watched her brother lead Hank and his idiot son into the old pizzeria. All right, will, she whispered, mimicking Jeff's voice. Maxine knew Jeff would never hurt Bonesy or any other animal. He was just positioning and helping Hank and Carl. Still, the words half stung. Maxine wraps an arm around Bunsy's neck. She stroked his black and butterscotch fur in a long, smooth motion. There you go, boy. It's all right. It's all right, Maxine said. Bunsy Grumple's rumple subside into a high-pitched whine. He begins to pant heavily, and his whole body trembles. He turns and gave Maxine several licks before looking back towards the pizzeria. When the dog gazes into the old building, he begins to tremble, and it begins to get worse as the trembling intensifies, and the whines turn into whimpers. Picking up the dog's obvious fear, Maxine's mouth goes dry. Her stomach was as tight as a drum, and I felt like her intense sense was clutching in to the rhythm to her heart driving beat. She peers through the pickup windshield and looks at the area behind the locked dock door. She pulls Bouncy closer. Jeff has thought that getting past the locking door was going to be the open sesame. You need to access the rest of the pizzeria. However, the loading dock he discovered was separated from the rest of the restaurant by a low lock metal door. Not wanting to fail at what he has been his idea, Jeff ran at the door and gave it a strong kick. The kick came more of desperation than confidence, but to Jeff's surprise, it worked. The loud crack and the door snapped off its hinges, flying backwards. The door landed with a reverberating wham. Jeff exhales in relief and looks at Hank and Carl nonchalantly, as if he totally known he had the strength to knock down the door. Moving forward with the "Yeah, I'm the man" strut, Jeff stepped toward the doorway and found himself in a shuttery kitchen lit by only a few dim bulbs. The faint light only sorts removes the kitchen expanse, but it did a great job of the hundred of cobwebs revealing the dusty space. Hank and Carl look around, both trying to show their weapons of choice. Jeff spoke up. Let's go check what we have to work with before we start, he suggested. Neither Hank nor Carl argued with Jeff, so he led them out of the kitchen. Stepping into the long dark hallway, Jeff shook off his heebie-jeebies that he started on the loading dock. For the next 10 minutes, Jeff and his henchmen entered the empty restaurant. This is going to be gas, Carl said, as they did a quick eater toward the place. After one circuit of the pizzeria, they returned to a huge wreck of the dining room, standing just inside the archway that separated the dining room from the desert lobby. The men exchanged grins. Okay, Jeff says. Let's be quick, but thorough. Maximum damage, maximum time. Hank and Carl enhance a glance. They nod. They nod and they get excited. Anything that looks valuable, Jeff says. Grab it. We'll set it up when we're done. Good? Hank and Carl nod again in unison. One lifts and one drops their other goated chin. Jeff, suddenly feeling more excited than fear, lets out a whoop. His brain dashed his crowbar like a berserk about to head into battle. This might have been inspired by the Viking movie seen that night before. Whatever. He was fired up and ready to go. Let's get to it, Jeff shouted. The three men exchanged fist bumps and charged into the action. Jeff and Carl ran into the dining room. Hank turned and strode into the lobby. After a couple steps, Jeff and Carl paths diverged. Carl marched straight across the dining room, aiming at the curtain's cover stage. Jeff burst left, heading to the arcade, angling toward the game area at full run. Jeff was raising the game ready to swing his crowbar as he got to the glass cabinet of the price counter. Jeff yells, "Yeehaw!" His berserk energy explodes into a frenzy as he brought down the crowbar on the dingy, expensive glass. A satisfying crack and crash precedes any rain, like a tingling that showers down into the black-white floor. Jeff grins and raises his crowbar again. They're striking the glass over and over again. Jeff quickly obtains the price cabinet. He pulverizes the glass into sparkling fragments that twinkle into the ray of sparklights that illuminate the arcade. Chopping over the nearly evaporated glass, grinning his head against the shards he saw, Jeff turns into the arcade and begins trashing every game console he can encounters. Pinball machines disintegrate the same way every price counter did. Plastic bumpers, flipper cracks, wood cabinets, splinter, litter arcade games scumper in similar ways as Jeff Kobar chews through them. Jeff's brain has gone into hibernation as he gave into the fury of striking and pounding the machines. Exhaustion beyond belief. The demolition charged Jeff up and gave him the strength to swing the crowbar over and over again. Sweat pounds off his face and his breath came in jerking heaves. But he didn't care. He was having the time of his life. Jeff was boogling to music only he could hear. The drum beat of a jazz rock song was thumping in his head. Meanwhile, Hank was moving to some own music with his rhythm, nudging left and right, cross-stepping, spinning, and hip wiggling. Hank was dancing his way past all the glass-framed posters in the front hallway. As he went, Hank was shattering the fragile expanses, hopping incredibly out of his way as jagged fragments flew toward him. In spite of his size, Hank thought he was pretty darn graceful in his ability to avoid the flying shards. Hank dances his way down the hall and back, and crushes the glass and frames. He was having a blast. Back in the lobby, Hank took care of the posters there too. Then, for on his groove, and not wanting to stop the boogie mode that has overtaken them, Hank starts on the walls, wielding his bat as nimbly as one of those baton twirls who prance around in front of marching bands. His trusty bat punches gaping holes in the lobby drywall. Cloud of dust explodes out from the walls. Hank figures he was probably turning white, but he didn't care. He was having too much fun. Carl hops into the stage and grins at the closed curtains. Having been told about Freddy's Pizzeria, Carl knew that he was probably behind the curtains. He couldn't wait to start his annihilation. Throwing his flashlight that he was spraying a parade and a drill line, Carl affected a cocky saunter as he stepped toward the gap in the curtains. Lifting the large flashlight with his left hand, poised to strike, Carl stuck his head behind the curtain, smirking. He called out, "Honey, I'm home." Carl gazed into the darkness expanse. His fresh grin faded, frowning, his flashlight wavering. He used his right hand to pull back the curtains so more of the dining room weak light could brighten the backstage area. He looked left and right. "Huh?" Carl said. The old crusty Freddy characters he expected to find, waited to be beaten in the smithereens, weren't there. The backstage was empty. Carl stepped forward and let the curtain close behind them. He felt like he was walking into the choking smoke of a dense fire. He could see little more than the fainted shapes around him, and the air felt thick and weird. It kind of smelled like, well, kind of smelled like that come from under his family's house, which the rats he poisoned had died and started decomposing. Carl looks around, half-heartedly, seeking something to destroy. He thought there might be costumes he could shred or propped, but he couldn't wreck. But Carl didn't even try to find something to bash with his flashlight. He was losing interest in the backstage area. Yeah, sure, that was it. The problem is, that wasn't when Carl was starting to feel spooked. Carl was feeling strange, even though his life was uninterested to his mechanical dad during the day and the rabid sports right after hours. Left little room for institution. His gut was telling him something was wrong here. Something fell off. Carlos quickly scrolled back to the curtains. He jumps off the stage, surveying the empty dining room. Carl listens to the sounds of cracking and crashing and clattering coming from the arcade in the front hallway. The sounds settle him. Even better, they gave him back to his pluck. His smirk returns, and he turns to face the stage. Laughing at him for letting the backstage get to him, Carl which thumped to thump his nose at the stage curtains, which were still swaying slightly from his movement through them. Then he gets a better idea. Carl's parents had never instilled him in the idea he was anything other than a disappointment. Who would have amounted much as a result? Carl has been walking for years with a frustrated ball of "I hate you" in his stomach. It wasn't like he hid his disdain for the world. He's flung around plenty of grousing and screams and sarcasm. But Carl has never fully expressed the depth of his scorn. Now he was going to. Tucking his flashlight in his belt, Carl started whistling as he unzipped his fly. "Place smells like a sewer," Carl said. So Carl plants his feet at the base of the stage. "Fire in the hole," he said. Jeff crackles in the giddy election as he looks down at the front quarters erupting into the air. Tinkling and twirling and churning, the coins scatter over the black and white squares over the floor. One they hit the dirty chalkboard. The coins spot and rolled and hopped. "That's what I'm talking about," Jeff said. He looked down at the coins and started to bend over to gather them, but then he gazed down onto the next machine. A locked coin box. One more, he thought. He stepped to the next machine and used his crowbar to open the vault. It gave way more easier than the last one, and another one, a waterfall of change, gushed over the floor. This time, Jeff couldn't help himself. He dropped to his knees and grabbed some handful of glittering bounty. "Yes," he shouted as he raised his fist and savored the feel of coins, rough edges. Yeah, they were just quarters on golden balloons, but Jeff still felt like the adventurer treasure. The last time he's been this jubilant was when he's hit the modest jackpot with the quarter slot of a casino in Vegas. Then his hunt hasn't been all that great, but the sound of ding and hoops cackling coins have given him a rush. He felt that same rush now. Jumping to his feet, Jeff was down towards the next machine in line. His race, his crowbar. After expressing his opinion on Freddy's in the world in general, Carlos moved on to the kitchen. There he found plenty of things to blow and beat up. Carl hooted as mountains of red plates and saucers shot forward out stains and units he just knocked over. The dinnerware exploded all over the floor, and Carl hopped up and down on the broken pieces, his heavy boots grinding over the crockery sand like bits. "Yeah," Carl shouted. He turned toward the expanse of stainless steel cabinets on the opposite wall. Anticipating more ruminous fun, Carl threw open one of the cabinet doors. The shelves behind the doors were empty. Carl let out an involuntary sigh. His bubble burst. Struggling, Carl slammed the cabinet door. Whatever, Carl muttered. He moved on to the next cabinet, flinging its door open, fully prepared to dump more fragile proximity or whatever it was. Carl slumped when he once again found empty shelves. Angered, Carl tried the next door, and the next, empty, empty. Carl tried one more. The last cabinet was empty. A small plastic painted cupcake sat on the cabinet bottle shelf, bright pink with googly eyes and two big white teeth. The cupcake sported a white candle, was centered on the small white plate. Carl frowned. What the? Hank milled in the dining room, whistled along with the music in his head. Ever since he started pounding on the dry walls, Hank has been hearing the frantic noise of the Torder song from Carmen. Hank loved that music. It always made him feel like a winner when he heard it, and it has become sort of his personal theme song. Hank twirled his bat and rumbled past the collapsing stack of bandieri chairs. When whistling got louder, and he directed the music with his free hand, the urge to dance returned as Hank looked for something else to distract. A clatter came from the arcade, and he looked that way, tempted to join Jeff. However, Hank didn't want to step on the kid's toes. Jeff tried to act tough, but Hank knew the guy was a closet wimp. Hank also knew that Jeff was afraid of him. Hank thought that he was a hoot, and he played into it as much as possible. But today he decided to let Jeff feel like he was the leader. Now Hank could find something else to play with. Maybe the kitchen, Hank thought. He started meandering in the direction, using his bat to destroy as much furniture as he could along the way. The kitchen, although not by any means bright, was lit enough to see that Carl hadn't needed his flashlight to see. The cupcake nestles in a misshapen patch of darkness under the shelf above it. However, required more illumination. What was this thing? Carl lifted his flashlight and aimed the beam at the bulging white eyes, nestled in hot pink. The ant crawling on the skin felt like it got backstage and returned. The cupcake was plain wrong. Its ways its gaze appeared to be locked on Carl, made him just want to. The cupcake blinks. Carl yelps. Before he could decide what to do, the animated mini cake makes a resounding clang from behind him. Carl spins around, not sure what to expect when he turns, but totally pent up and ready for, well, anything. Carl was relieved when he saw no movement, except the back and forth motion of the two large copper pots hanging from a stainless steel rack upon the heavy-duty restaurant range. Carl rolls his eyes in his overreaction and reserved direction to return his attention to the weird little cupcake. He once again returns and aims the flashlight at the cupcake was gone. The cargo sucks up his breath and stares at the uneven lights jittering out in the front of the flashlight. His gaze back up in the light. It was shaking. Well, hell yeah, it was shaking where the cupcake go. His eyes open wide as he can get them. Carl slowly rotates, clutching his flashlight as he sweeps the area around him. The beam lights shines. The wobbly ray of light cuts to the kitchen, splattering grayness and lands on. Carl's eyes nearly pop out of his head. He found the cupcake, and that wasn't all. The pink cupcake and its plate were now being held in a massive yellow fur pan. Carl, his flashlight's beams waggle as it roses upward from the cupcake. When the light encountered the molded whole dingy yellow face of a massive chick with a huge mouthful of bird teeth. Carl only had a second to feel a surge of shock before the psychotic bird lunged at him. Chapter 12. Just a couple of steps from the service door that separated the kitchen from the back of the hallway, Hank was readying his bat when he heard a shriek that stopped him in the tracks. The shriek was so loud it felt like it radiated right through Hank's skin and drilled into his veins, constricting the blood that was trying to flow through him. The sound was very clearly from the other side of the door Hank was approaching, his whole body quivering in response to the chilling sound. The shriek had been so piercing that it didn't sound human, but the shrieks were human, and it's come from the sun. Hank steps forward and continually peers through the round window, sending the service door. Tense, ready to react, and hanging from a couple feet to the door, Hank looks through the dirty glass. Because the kitchen lights were so tame, Hank couldn't see much of anything through the glass. He had to look closer. The torture song comes to a screeching stop, and the surging sounds of the arcade ends in a few minutes before. Hank shakes off the sudden grim silence that pressing around him. He puts his face up to the door glass. The silence gave way to another series of noise. This time, screams intertwined with the gaps in the glamorous chaos of taps and clanks and tongues. Hank's gaze looked toward and the sound he saw. Hank looked out of surprise and horror. His breath caught half in and half out, threatening to choke him. Hank glanced at the prone body of his son, starting just looking at Carl's flopping feet and moving up to just seeing his body. Hank gazed land on something that just couldn't be possible, but it was. A small bright pink cupcake with a toothy mouth was chewing its way through Carl's face, or what was left of it. Carl? Hank breathed. The truth was, Carl no longer had a face. The cupcake was burrowing halfway into Carl's head. The bone structure of Carl's face was obliterated, and the cupcake was still glowing. Too stunned to even process what he was seeing, Hank yelled. His gaze was upward. It tracked along the stripes of a yellow-orange material clinging to exposed metal. It ran over the budge of the bird, saying, with the words of a dirty bib, revealing, "Let's eat." The beak reveals two rows of vicious-looking teeth. Above the teeth of the beak, inwardent white eyes were staring directly back at Hank. Hank screams. Once he empties all the coins of their belt, Jeff has filled his duffel bag with his loot and slunks it over his shoulder. Straining happily, Jeff has headed toward the front of the restaurant. Jeff has seen Hank heading toward the back hallway. He didn't know where Carl was, and at that moment he hadn't cared. He was doing some more spoils. Doing a quick exploration of the front hallway, poking his head briefly behind each of the closed doors. Jeff has found the security office and in the halls. When he spotted the old security cameras, he knew he could do some real damage in that room. Jeff has smiled widely as he stepped into the unit's room. It's the only light that came from the security monitors. Eager to waste the equipment, Jim hadn't bothered swiping at the light switches. He dropped his duffel bag on the floor. It hadn't laughed with a satisfying rush of clinks and a few tinkles as a handful of coins escaped from the canvas carrier. Jeff has started toward the desk ahead of the monitors. He raises his crowbar in preparation for some more vandalism. Stepping behind the desk, Jeff has taken aim at the monitors. That's when he hears the screams. He starts with a screeching that didn't even start like it came from a person's mouth. A stretch of silence and then another set of screams. More silence. Then one loud, drawn out scream. Instead of laying waist down with his crowbar, Jeff looks at the monitors. His gaze whips from one other to the next. The last scream shows long, deep, and uneven. Jeff was sure it had come from Hank. Hank? Jeff leans forward and looks at the monitors. Looks at the interior views. There, on the dining room camera feed, Hank could be seen sprinting towards the wide open space. He was running, flat out, as if being chased by a whole horde of ghouls. Raph, Jeff watches under Hank disappear from the dining room feed. Jeff gazes, shifting to the other monitor, and sure enough, that was Hank pounding down the main hallway. He was coming towards the office. But wait. On the monitor, Hank stopped and looked back over his shoulder. His movements were spasmodic. He was clearly scared out of his mind. As Jeff continued watching the monitors, Hank flung open one of the doors that lined the halls, on down the middle hallway. Hank dashed toward the door and disappeared from the view. Jeff frowned and looked at the other monitors. None of them provided a view of what was behind the doors. Hank has gone through it, and it was a supply closet. Jeff knew this was from curiosity check off of the area. How are you doing? Jeff asked. And Hank, who couldn't see or hear him. What are you broken out of the poster frame glass? Hank has thought to destroy the front glass set into all the doors. He wasn't sure he hadn't, but now he was glad he had left the doors alone. Hank was hoping this one was going to prevent him from having his face eaten, or something worse. Hank wasn't sure what kind of enclosure he was in. A closet? A room? The most windy bit of light from the hallway seeped through the frosted glass of the door, and the light revealed lit more than the door frame and the doorknob. Everything else around Hank was so black. It was like the void of light has mass and substance. It felt like the mass was crowded in around Hank. I attempted to wrap him in less than a friendly hug. The sound of Wank's wheezing breath filled in the darkness. He could smell the reek of his own sweat and the stink of his own breath. And it smelled like the smell of the coffee he stood before coming into the pizzeria. Outside the door, a shout reaches down the hall. Hank? It was Jeff's voice, and the guy didn't sound particularly scared. His voice was laced down with more curiosity than fear. Hank inhaled with relief as he inhales. If Jeff was coming down the hall, calling Hank's name, the big yellow bird thing could have been nearby. Jeff wasn't the sharpest tool in the shed, but he wasn't stupid enough to be calling out like that if he wasn't facing a threat. Jeff! Hank shouts. Hank! Jeff responds, what are you doing? His voice was a little fainted. He was still a ways down the hall. A force of two was better than a force of one. Together, they could get out of the building. Hank grabs the doorknob and he tries to turn it. He wouldn't budge. Hank just goes the knob. Fortunately, it held fast. He threw his considered bulge against the door. It held up to his weight. We can do song requests on maybe at some point next time. We can do song requests next time. I did have a planned song request for next time, so I'll keep that in mind. Don't worry, I'll keep that in mind. We have an event for song requests. He threw his considering bulge against the door. It helped up to his weight. No longer thinking about Jeff or anything else, Hank was now single-mindedly intent on getting out of the room he was stuck in. He tried battering the door with his body again, but that got him nothing but a sore shoulder. Hank turned and looked into the outer space like vacuum behind him. He quailed and turned back to the door. He began swiping at the walls with the flat of his hand. Come on, Hank muttered. There had to be a light switch, but there wasn't. Hank's groping hand found nothing but rough wall, even when he stepped to the right and the left. A telltale jingling came along Hank's head. Not a switch, he thought. A pull cord. Hank reached and felt around. His hand encountered the end of a heavy string. He grasped and pulled it. Nothing. Come on, Hank begins as he yanks again. This time the cord did its job. A single bare light bulb came out. Hank blew out a pent-up breath. Yeah, he said. Now all he had to do was find something in the room that he could break the doorknob with. Hank turns and looks right into a pair of glowing eyes. Those eyes didn't belong to the ugly, Leo-looking chick, but they didn't belong to anything cuddly either. Hank was looking up into another tooth-filled face. This face, topped by two bent rabbit ears, was missing most of its fur. Its bright white eyes were surrounded by a mass metal and exposed wires. Hank screams yet again. Just a few feet from the closet, Hank calls has come from Jeff, who was walking slowly, led by the heavy duffel bags, froze when he heard Hank screaming. Jeff looks toward the door. The first scream was followed by a second one, then a third. The sound of whipping and crunching, which wrapped around the screams like devouring serpents, reached out from behind the door. The door rattled and smacked. A silhouette hand hits the door's frosted glass. Jeff's breathing catches in his throat when he watches the hand leave and a bright smear across the glass. The smear streaks downward above the hand, and the hand drops from the view. Hank wasn't screaming anymore. Jeff realizes when the hand disappears from the glass, all Jeff can hear was a faint gurgle. Then silence. Jeff's crowbar slits from his hand. It hits the Leone with a dang clank, then rebounds down the halls, and then seems to boomerang back to Jeff. His gaze still riveted on the door, Jeff adjusted the duffel bag strap that cuts into his shoulders. It felt like the bag was getting heavier by the moment. Jeff took a tentative step to close the door. Hank, he whispered. Jeff wasn't sure when he said Hank's name. He didn't know what happened to Hank, but he knew it wasn't good. Still, maybe Hank was injured and needed help. Jeff shuffled forward another half step, but he stopped when the door shimmered ever so slightly. Jeff locked his gaze in the door. He looked back down the hallway towards the office. Should he retreat? Locked himself in that room? He looked down the hall. Should he make a run for it? Head for the main door? Jeff's brain was chained by the blood encouraged veins that pulsed madly in tunes with his heart, clocking pace. He didn't think a door began to open, inch by inch. More and more mysterious murk was revealed. Hank? Jeff asked. Hank did not appear, but something else did. Jeff felt like the floor beneath him turned into the yawning deck of a boat caught in a hurricane when he saw what was stepping out into the hallway. Reality folded on itself. Jeff was looking at the oversized mess of a mass robotic bunny. Jeff tries to perceive the torn and dirty fur exposing metal beneath it, and the blue bented ears. And as Jeff looked at the bunny, it turned towards him. The bunny has blazing white eyes and exposed metal ravaged face dominated by an impossible white mass of horrible teeth. Those eyes were looking right at Jeff. Jeff's brain, overcome as it was, managed to get a message to Jeff's feet. Run, his brain commanded. Jeff spun around and shot like a rocket down the halls. Back towards the hallway, the heavy duffel bag slams against Jeff's hips, over and over as he ran. The pounding hurts, and yet Jeff couldn't bring himself to drop the bag. He kept lunging it with him as he got up through the halls. He could hear the tinkling clang of coins hitting the floor behind him, but even that didn't discourage him from hanging on to the behind the walls with the bag. He clutched it even as he rushed into the office and slammed the door behind him. Just Jeff fumbled with the door lock, eventually clicking into place. He stared at the door as he finally dropped the duffel bag. More coins spilled over the floor with a clatter. Jeff didn't care. Looking wildly around him, Jeff spotted the landline phone on the shelf behind the desk. He dashed over to it and snatched up the receiver. He immediately starts punching in 911 as he puts the phone to his. Jeff pulls the phone from his ear. He winces and starts at the receiver. A nightmarish clamor of children's laughter was blasting from the phone. The laughter was high pitched and frenzied. Jeff drops the receiver back into the cradle. He looked over at the door and it was still closed. Jeff couldn't see anything from the glass. He turns his attention to the CCTV monitors. His gaze immediately lands on the exterior feed that was focused on the back of the building. Jeff saw his truck with Max in the loading docks. Max remains in the cab with Bunsey. For an instant, Jeff's heart rate slows. The truck was safe. All he had to do was get to movement on the monitors caught Jeff's attention. He looks at it, glaring directly back at Jeff, or rather at the cameras that was fed with the monitors, with a blue bunny and a yellow chick with a sharp yellow beak. Although the chick's face was in a better shape than the rabbit's, it didn't look any less threatening. It didn't look any less threatening. Both the chick and the bunny continued to study the camera. Jeff couldn't feel them looking past the lens down the wires directly at him. He took a step back from the monitors. At the same time, the chicks on the monitor moved. Jeff stepped forward again, leaning in to see the monitor more clearly. Jeff watched the chick bend over and crouch down. It was right in front of a vent cover, low down on the wall. Jeff felt his brows bunch as he tried to figure out what the chick was doing. The chick wrenched the vent cover off the wall. Then she held a plate in front of her. Jeff blinked. He hasn't even noticed the plate until a bright pink cupcake with a buck teeth off of the plate and disappeared into the now open vent. One in the Jeff began metallic banging and the clanging results to the building. It was muffled in distance, but it stretched out and reached like fingers into the office. Jeff looked at the walls around him. It seems that the sound was coming from within them. He returned his attention to the monitors, urging his brain to help him out. What was going on? Jeff looked at the walls again as the man continued, and then he got in. No, Jeff said. The banging began getting louder. The cupcake was moving fast. Jeff stopped away from the desk and quickly scanned the room. His gaze going left, up, and down. His gaze lands on the vent covers on the wall. Jeff stares at it, and then the banging volume went up under a couple notches. Getting close, Jeff thought. He immediately drops to his knees and he ducks under the kazooza and looks at the vent covers. He just has to find a way to block. A noisy clanging bang. Jeff spots the pink on the other side of the vent cover. Instantly, Jeff braces himself against the slatted metal. It trashes against his shoulder. Jeff yelps and looks down between the slats. He could see a flurry of bright pink through the dark gray openings. The office furnace belts caught the white of Narcian razor-sharp teeth, snapping viciously at the steel metal. Jeff hiccuped several panicked breaths, trying to brace his rubber-sole hiking boots across the dusty yard. Jeff attempts to press harder against the vent covers. The dust, however, creates a surface harder to slick as ice, and Jeff's feet slips away from him. The teeth against the metal slat sounded like metal was meeting a power saw. The high, tiny sun was chipping away at Jeff's eardrums. Whimpering, he tries to replant his feet, but they once again slid across the floor. The vent cover shuddered and the corner of pops loosened from the wall. Jeff wails. He closes his eyes and shut and shifts his shoulder to press against it. The loose edge of another clamorous slam and silence. His breath still ragged, his pulse pounding. Jeff opened one eye and looked at the slats. He saw nothing. Jeff tilted his head and looked hard into the air as his shafts gloomed. The church behind the vents covers was empty. Jeff exhales loudly. He pulls out his shoulder from the vent covers and brought a shaky hand to his face, wiping away the sweat that matted his hair to his skin and ran down his neck. Weakly, Jeff lettered himself to his feet. He took another deep breath. As he started to exhale, he turned back towards the desk. Jeff froze. His breathing stopped mixed with hell. The office door was open. Feeling like his eyeballs were vibrating in his head, Jeff strained to look towards the open doorway. At the same time, he tried to retcon why the door was open. He had locked it, hasn't he? And even if he hadn't, who would open it? Jeff's gaze whipped around the office. He was the only one in it, but his attention snapped to the filling cabinets on the opposite wall, and then the single upright locker next to the breaker box on the wall opposite door. Could this small thing happen gotten into it? The disturbing thought lit a fire under Jeff's feet. He hustled toward the open door, hesitating next to the door jamb, currently afraid of what might be hiding in the office and what might be lurking outside of it. Jeff, Jeff inches his head towards the door's opening. Once he gets his head far enough into the halls to see, he looks down the length of the halls in both directions. He saw nothing. Jeff couldn't believe his luck. He wasn't going to waste it. He immediately dashes into the hallway and starts towards the dum 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 the dum 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 the ding dum. Jeff turns into a statue. Who was that? The voice, which seems to be bouncing every way, which was at once, was a cross between a chant and a Mario song. It was a teasing voice, but not a nice teasing. The tone was one a bully would use, taunting, torturing. Jeff rethought his action plan. Maybe running through the halls wasn't such a good idea at the moment. He turns and starts back towards the office. As soon as Jeff turns a step through the office, the door whips shut with a resounding wham. Jeff recoils, but he quickly rushes toward forward. Jeff grabs the doorknob and tries to turn it. The knob won't move. Jeff shook it, and the knob didn't give it its all. It was locked. And worst of all, from down the halls towards the lobby, a tingling, skittering sound was heading in Jeff's direction. A scrap, a clink, a set of clinks. Jeff knew exactly what that sound was. He was hearing the coins that he had leaked from his duffel bag when he was running. They were streamed through the hallways, and now they were being moved by footsteps. Shuffle, clink, scraps, clatter. Something was moving the coins across the area. Each note was each note but the jarring little dum-dums drilled into Jeff's body. Like each tone was one of the billion nanobots boring into the pores. Jeff's whole body began to tremble. He couldn't hear his own teeth chattering. Jeff whipped away from the office door. He took off down the hall, away from the lobby, towards the red exit sign at the hallway end. In full gallop, when he reached the emergency exit door, Jeff slammed at the crash bar and he bounced back as he shifted his as he shifted his feet to keep his balance. He heard a rapid rush of footsteps whizzing towards him. Jeff turned it just in time to see the flash of a hook acting towards the air, heading directly at his face. Jeff opens his mouth and begins to scream, but the sound was cut off before he can scream. Chapter 13. No matter how steely Maxine stroked Bonesy's fur, the dog wouldn't settle. Maxine had cuddled close to the dog in the pickup cab, but still he hadn't stopped whining and whimpering since Jeff and the others had disappeared into the pizzeria. Bonesy's jaws were floating with drool and his whole body was quivering. It was making Maxine nervous, primarily because Bonesy's anxiety was contagious. Maxine didn't need the dog apprehensions added to her own. She was plenty exaggerated herself. For maybe the 20 or 50th time, Maxine pushed up the cuff of the long-sleeved black shirt she worn for the stupid, ill-conceived venture. She found out the digital numbers on her black sports watch. What the hell are they? Maxine asked herself. Enough was enough. Maxine couldn't sit here waiting any longer. She couldn't imagine what was taking them so long. They were supposed to make a quick mess, grab anything value, and come back. They shouldn't have taken this much time. Huffing, Maxine takes toward the driver's seat door handle. She flunks the door open. Before Maxine could have made a muscle to leave the pickup, Bunsey leaps across her. In a friction of seconds, the dog was out of the truck and bolts away. Bunsey, wait. Maxine scrambles out of the truck and starts going after her dog. Bonesy, she shouts again. Bonesy then breaks stride. He crosses the broken abstracts in the flash of fur. Maxine runs, but before she can even make it 10 feet, Bonesy has disappeared into the trees at the edge of the pizzeria lot. Maxine stops. Her heart was a jackhammer in her chest. Her mind immediately filled with the images of Bonesy getting lost, or stolen, or hit with a car, or mauled by a wild animal. Maxine hugs herself. Recklessly, she turns back to her pickup. She couldn't outrun her dog. Her best bet was to go after him in the truck. But then she didn't have the keys. Her brother did. Maxine had no choice. She had to go into the building and go to get Jeff. They couldn't go after Bonesy. Maxine looked up at the open loading door. What lay beyond it looked like the yawning opening to a demon lair. Not smart, Maxine muttered as she took a forward step. Yeah, but she didn't have a better idea, so she kept going. Picking her way across the dirty, disintegrated concrete of the docking dock, Max went slowly, allowing her eyes to adjust the insufferable lights. When she had more night vision, she was able to spy a fluttering door that must have been the battering sound she had heard right after Jeff and the others had disappeared from her sight. Maxine crept forward, and she reaches the open doorway and leans towards it. She peers left and right and saw that she was on the threshold of the pizzeria's stainless steel filled industrial kitchen. Jeff, Maxine calls slowly. Nothing but silence answers her. Maxine gingerly steps into the kitchen. She looks around. Carl, she tries. This time, Maxine gets a response. Sort of. The thrill of child's laughter looks from behind Maxine. The sound felt like a light touch, a tickle behind her shoulder blades. Maxine turns around. Immediately she sees the source of the laughter. Standing in the mule golden area at the door of the opposite side of the kitchen, a little sandy-haired boy stares at Maxine. No smile, not an expression at all. The expression was blank. He must be lost, Maxine thought, and traumatized. Maxine opens her mouth to say hello, but the boy turns and dashes away before she can even begin her greeting. He flashes through the open area and disappears into the depth of gray outside the kitchen. Hey, wait! Maxine shouts. No longer thinking of her brother or Bonesy, Maxine starts forward, following the boy. A lost little kid trying to everything. She had to help him. Exiting the kitchen, Maxine found herself in a long hallway that was as dark as uninvited as the abandoned tunnel in the coal mine. She looked and left and right down the black and white checkerboard flavored halls. It was empty. Hello, Maxine called out. The word danced around the halls, spun around, comes back, with a sort of hush chase down. Max tries again more loudly. Hello. Once again, the world and the word twirls around her and comes back firing once again until stutters follow it. Maxine frowns, gazing down the halls again, both ways. Which direction should she go? Maxine shrugs. She turns to her left. Cold. The word comes out in two syllables. Cold. It was a child's voice, and the pitch sounds like the same little boy that giggled. The sound came from the right end of the hallway. Maxine reverses her direction. She takes a step forward. Warmer. Same little boy voice. Playful. Maxine makes a face. You gotta be kidding me, she mutters. The kid wasn't as traumatized as she thought he was. Maybe he wasn't even lost. Still, she probably should find him just in case he was. And she still needed to find Jeff, too. Maxine took a half step forward, her head swiveled left and right, all for her nerve endings were on alert. For the few next minutes, Maxine pushed deeper into the walls of the tomb-like building, pausing to listen at the closing doors, but lacking the courage to open them. Maxine follows the hallway until it went around the corner. Warmer, the boy says again. His voice sounded both close and far away at the same time. Maxine still couldn't figure out where the kid was. It almost seems like it was in the halls, one and walls, moving along with her. But that was impossible. Maxine looked down the stretch of corridors in front of her, and for the first time she left the kitchen, she saw movement. A set of double doors at the end of the halls was swinging, as if someone had just pushed through them. Maxine eyes the wagging doors. Has the boy gone that way? Or was it something else? Maxine opens her mouth to call her brother's name, but something instant closed her mouth again. Wrapping her arms around herself to ward off the chills that made her feel her skin was itching in the way of her bones, Maxine walked slowly toward the doors. Each of her steps took away shy Candace on her tap feelings. Maxine, fighting the overpowered urge to run in the opposite direction, forces herself forward. She felt oddly disconnected from herself, as if she wasn't moving as she was supposed to be moving. I felt like she was being compelled to a black hole of some magnetic force. And then she was pushing through the double doors of herself. Halfway through them, she paused. Pencil-like lines of golden light, three of them, just toward Maxine. She looked ahead of them, and she realized she was seeing sunlight, 30 narrow windows. The light was odd. Maxine took another step and let go of the doors. The shush tickles the air of current, as the doors are telling her to fall close behind her. Hello, Maxine calls. You in here? When she got no answer again, Maxine checks her surroundings. As soon as she did, her crawling skin picks up the pace, and so did her heartbeat. What is this place? Maxine rotates to take in the metal shoveling and stainless steel work tables. Her gaze scans piles of tools and what looks like robotic parts, metal legs and arms, and torsos and eyelids heads were. Maxine's gaze stopped, scanning and locked in, and has gotten stuck on something. Maxine hasn't noticed at first, beyond the work tables and a reclining metal chair with straps sat empty. Above the chair and spaced throughout the room, metal pendant lights hung low, dripping over the barest hint of illumination. That's not good, Maxine thought. Maxine so wanted to run. Why wasn't she running against her own will? Maxine took another two steps into the room. She attempted to look around to see if she could spot the little boy, but her gaze remained riveted on a chair. Even when Maxine felt a shiver of warning scuttering down her own skin and spine, the sensation of being watched, strong and urgent, she kept her gaze fixed on the chair. For all she knew, a monster was behind her. One couldn't seem to turn out the final round. Psst. It was the little boy again, close and loud. Maxine yelps and finally spins around. She scrambles the area behind her. We couldn't find the kid. Where was he? Maxine was getting really tired of this game. It was beyond creepy in here. The robot parts Maxine had seen in the room were bad enough, but now her gaze has landed on to a more complete robot. An animatronic, a big one. Maxine has to tilt her head back to inspect the full height of it. The jitter that was still prodding Maxine to run to kick up a notch. When Maxine stayed where she was, she studied the thing yardly. When Maxine was looking at it, it appeared to be one of the big versions of the animal characters that has been part of the pizzeria's heyday. In fact, Maxine thought, it looked like a broken down bear more closely. This might have been Freddy himself. Although the stiff-rigged looking robotic bear has looked like it's been intact, unlike whatever the critters has lost the pieces lying around the room, it has seen better days. Its brown fur, rungy, smelling, disgusting decay has large chunks missing, as if it's something has been eating its way through its plush, covering the insides. The missing piece of fur reveals wobbly twin of wires and sharp link of aging metals. The bare face was the most intact part of the robotic structure. Its impossibly wide mouth was stuffed full of what looked like very sharp white teeth, and its round white eyes were in pristine condition. In here, it was the little boy again. His voice was muffled, and it was coming from Maxine gave herself a mental shake. This can't be right, she thought, but replaying the boy's words in her head, Maxine realized she had heard what she thought she heard. The boy's voice was coming from inside the ratty bear. How the heck did you get in there? Maxine asked. Her question was hushed, disbelieving. Steadying herself, Maxine took a step forward. She kept an eye unwavering on the bear as she stepped forward yet again. Hesitating as an instant, she finally leaned in and put her ear against the grinning bear's chest. Maxine immediately heard the child giggled. She jumped back and gawked at the bear's belly. The kid was inside the bear. How did it? It didn't matter. Maxine had to get the kid out of the thing. Giggling or not, the boy was little, and Maxine couldn't just leave him inside a mountain of gross fur and metal. But how was she going to get the boy out? Maxine walked around the bear. Giggling, she pointed at it and poked and pushed at various parts of its anatomy. There must be a switch or something, she thought. Nothing that Maxine messed with on the bear did anything, except the jaw. When Maxine reached down and put her hand against the side of the bear's head, the jaw moved, encouraged. Maxine shifted her hand and levered the jaw downwards. The bear's mouth yawned apart, revealing an opening that got bigger and bigger. Maxine goggles at the huge gaping hole that now made up the lower half of the bear's face. She frowned and aperture. Was it big enough for the child to get through? Probably. But from where Maxine stood, well below the bear's open mouth, she could see down inside the bear. Maxine looks around the room. She gets something to stand on. Maxine spots a folding chair tucked against the end of one of the long shelves. She drives over and grabs it. Bringing the dirty gray metal chair back to the animatronic, Maxine positions in front of the bare legs. She steps onto the chair seat. The chair snaps out, a snapping pink, and it wobbles, but it held. Maxine shifts her feet and leans towards the gaping mouth. It was amazing how the human could possibly be powerful when they wanted to do one thing, and yet do the opposite. Every fiber of Maxine's being was yelling no as she puts her face towards the bear's pared teeth. As soon as Maxine got close enough to the mouth, she tilted her head to look down inside the cavern of the bear's torso. She gasped when a small hand rose up, reaching towards her face. There you Maxine began, but then her words and her face were snatched downwards. The little hands had seized her by her mouth, small fingers curled around her lower teeth and lipped. It yanked, and Maxine's squealing was heaved downwards towards a metal-filled tunnel wrapped in wires. Maxine was on the skinny side, but she was skinny enough to fit comfortably toward the confines of an animatronic train. Metal scoring at her skin, Maxine screamed as her feet came off the chair. Barely aware of the sound of the chair clattering to the floor, Maxine scissored her feet and pressed her head against the bear's crusty shoulders. She put against the hard surface and kicked frantically. Maxine felt her foot graze against something. She heard something. She had one of the pendant lights, trying to twist one way and then the other to get free. Maxine saw the pendant lights where they craned, facing back and forth, still being lowered inexorably into a seamless bottom lightness as well. Maxine kept fighting, even as her skin was wrapped by the metal. She craned her neck, looking up towards freedom. On the ceiling, she caught a glimpse of a shadow play. Her on the ceiling. Shining legs and flattening arms created a tangle of light and darkness entanglement that looked like a battle between a knight and a tail-whipping dragon. Watching her struggle away almost made it seem impersonal, like Maxine was outside of it and caught within it. Almost powerful tug came up from the bear, and Maxine hated to admit this was happening to her. It was very personal. Maxine stepped in and fell to the darkness. A shocking severe jaw pressure sliced through Maxine's waist as she screamed through her screams. She heard a wet thud. Maxine's brains had only seconds left, but in those seconds, Maxine knew she just heard the sound of her lower body hitting the floor. The bear has bitten her in half. I don't know, on. Oh my god. We're gonna reach. We're almost done. We're almost at chapter. We got. How are we at? Two. Good. 7 pages into chapter 14. We're almost done. Mike sat at the kitchen table. He wasn't doing much of anything, just sitting there. Well, actually, he was doing something. He held the plastic and tin fake security badge, him turning it over and over in his hand, staring at it as if it was a crystal ball that could give him the answers to his endless questions. Most of his questions were related to all the things happening in his dreams. Those questions were so complex that he knew he had no hope of answering them. Another set of questions were related to Vanessa. What an odd woman, but odd in a good way. Mike was probably drawn to her, and at the same time, she made him nervous. No way his brain could think of the thing either. Of course, there was the usual question behind Mike was going to clean the train wreck that was his life. Well, those are old and boring, so no answers. So Mike settled on the most immediate puzzle. How could he make of Abby? His sister was seriously angry with him for locking her in her room the night before. As a result, she was even more distant than usual. Mike wishes he could explain to Abby that everything he did was a part of his attempt to take care of her. His overriding goal was to protect her, keep her safe, but Abby didn't want to hear anything Mike had to say. A few feet from Mike, high-pitched chatter and a canned laughter came from the TV. Abby sat on the sofa, but she didn't seem to be paying attention to the cartoon on the screen. She was as usual drawing in her drawing pad. She scribbled constantly, forward between her brows and tongue clumped between her teeth and on her lips. Mike sighed and stood. He walked over the couch and sat down next to Abby. "What you working on?" Mike asked. Abby stopped drawing. She got up and glances into the kitchen, sitting down in the very chair that Mike has just sat on. Mike sighs. "So, what's the plan here?" Mike asked Abby's back. She was wearing a banana yellow overalls today. Crisscross of the overalls, back straps steamed the glare at Mike. "You never gonna speak to me again?" He pushed. Abby says nothing. She centered her drawing pads in front of her table. She arranged 1,000 or so drawing pens next to it as she begins to draw again. "Seems like it," Mike thought. Mike grabs the badge once again. He holds it up in front of him. "Guess you don't want this then," he says. Abby looks up. Mike smiles. "Gotcha," he thought. Mike tosses the badge to Abby. She lifts a hand and caught it. "Pretty cool, right?" Mike asks. Abby holds the badge and glances at it. With apparent distance, Mike knew her well enough, however, to recognize fake nonchalance when he saw it. Maybe he cracked her armor. But no, Abby threw the badge back at Mike. He barely snatched it from the air before he hit him in the nose. Abby picked up the pencil and returned to drawing. Mike looked up at the ceiling and exhaled loudly. Forget it, he said. Mike stood striding back into the kitchen. He grabbed the knot of the junk jar near the sink. He went to pull it open, and it jammed. He jiggled it, banging back in a curse. Then finally, he got the jar open, and he dropped the toy badge in with the other junk. He rammed the jar back into place, turning toward his sister. Mike says to the back of her head, I'm trying my best, Abby. I really am. Abby remains mute. Okay, so it's gonna be like that, Mike thought. Mike heads towards the hallway. At first, Abby didn't move, but then, out of the corner of Mike's eye, he saw her lift her head, just a little. Mike pretends he didn't see Abby's gaze flit his way. He also pretended that he didn't see her expression, which looked very bit as remorseful as though himself. Maybe she should come around soon, Mike told himself as he headed towards his bedroom. There was nothing he could do if she didn't, and certainly there was nothing good more he can do right now. On to the other mysteries. Mike entered his bedroom, leaving the door open so he could listen for Abby. In case she decided to call him or get him in some kind of trouble, Mike opened his closet and plucked his laptop from the single shelf above his pitifully sparse collection of clothes. Heck, make that the sparse collection of belongings, period. Mike had no furniture in his room other than a bed and a nightstand, not just because he could afford anything more. He also had no need for a piece of furniture. He had nothing to put on except the dresser or chair or desk. Besides his clothes and his shoes and a laptop and a few tools, all his closet held was a box of old photographs, a plastic container, and a wooden blocks. The blocks had been Mike's favorite toy when he was a kid. He always liked building things. In spite of everything, he couldn't bring himself to throw the blocks out. Taking his laptop to bed, and feeling surprised sorry for himself, Mike fluffs his pillows, settles himself back against the headboard, opens his laptop. After logging in, he clicks on his browser icon and starts typing the search box. Mike begins with the word Freddy Fazbear and he hints and enters and looks at the screen. Mike's search brought up not much more than a bunch of stock images of Freddy and his weirdo cohorts. Mike got up a close look at the bunny, the chick, the fox, and as well as other critters he didn't know about, but he didn't find anything interesting. He backed out of the search, but then he tried again, typing Freddy Fazbear's missing children. Now we're talking, Mike says, as a slew of news headlines pop up on the screen. Mike scans them, and he picks up Sad Night at Freddys. Clicking on the header, Mike skims the article. Unfortunately, it didn't tell him much more than Vanessa had. But wait, there's an embedded video. Mike clicks on the video and hits the play icon. Watching the white circle spinning in the middle of his screen, Mike types his finger on the side of the laptop as he waits for the video to load. Finally, the image of a blonde, pert-nosed female news reporter fills Mike's screen. The woman drops shoulder top and leggings, as well as the curly wildness of her big hair screams 80s, mid 80s, Mike thought. The woman had a painted on face typical for the same. She had large eyes and wide mouths in the moment, same typical for the time. Both eyes were and mouths were arranged in a theatrical expression of tragic regret. The woman was positioned in front of the bright, shiny version of Freddy Fazbear's Pizza. It was the Freddy's Mike was guarding, but it was a blast from the past brilliant place. The paint was fresh, the lighting was bright, and those people milling around it, lots of people, and the police cars, several ununiformed officers were crowding onlookers. Men in suits, obviously detectives, were strutting around importantly. The puffy-haired woman wasn't the only news reporter in the scene. A bunch of news vans were packed around the area, just beyond a river of yellow crime scene tapes, which fluttered in a steady breeze. A few other women and men with microphones posed in front of the camera. A man who had 80 video cameras era weighing down their shoulders. The blonde reporter begins speaking. Tragedy tonight, as she begins predictably. At local pizzeria, Freddy Fazbear's Pizza has become re-owned for family fun, a great place for kids. But tonight, it was anything but that. Instead, it was the heartbreaking setting of an abduction and terror. Five children who were attending a birthday party event at the pizzeria suddenly and mysteriously vanished into thin air. Mike immediately caught up in the scene. He leaned closer to the screen. And that is where we'll stop with chapter 14. Yeah.